This is part 2 of Astronomy in Reverse by Pansley. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoy, and subscribe for future stories. Please check the description for a full list of tags, and the link to drop a kudos for the original author. With that out of the way, let's continue. Chapter 20, Hollowed Out. Mission Report, December 16, 1991. Bucky wakes up with a stranger's voice echoing in his head. A man's voice, cold and angry, a Sokovian accent clinging to each word, English and Russian alike. It takes him a minute to assign a face to the voice, and with the face comes a name, and the name has him gasping for breath as he jolts awake. Everything is confusing at first. Bucky doesn't know where he is or why his chest feels like someone hollowed it out, leaving an aching void where his heart, lungs and stomach used to be. His head throbs nearly as badly, but not quite, and he's shaking. His whole body is trembling to the point that it's more worrisome than annoying. Between the wetness welling up in his eyes and the piercing headache, he can't focus on his surroundings long enough to figure out where he is. He knows he isn't at home, but not much more than that. He doesn't remember anything, until pieces slowly come back to him in flashes, just a little at a time. But they bring more questions than answers. When the throbbing in his head starts to subside somewhat, he blinks his eyes open, takes in the small, open cell that makes his skin go numb from the horrifying familiarity. His back is resting against the only solid wall, the other three and the ceiling all barred like a jail cell. He recognizes the lab that makes up the rest of the room, the operating table that looks like it hasn't been touched in years, everything abandoned, the lights overhead that are burnt out, all except one. Bucky swallows the terrified lump in his throat, not sure how they brought him back to Siberia, or why. And then he looks down at himself and sees the red. He remembers that it isn't his blood, before he remembers how he knows that. A word pops into his head, innocuously, offered up like his subconscious whispered it into the soundless vacuum of his mind. Hysteric. That's really the only word to describe what happens next, how he can be so still and quiet that even his breaths are silent to his heightened ears one moment, and the next, sobbing so hard that his vision is blurred. He's tormented by flashes of tall grass swaying in the breeze, an open field, a blue sky blanketing an even bluer lake. Now that he's fully awake, the memory seems determined to return to him despite how badly Bucky wants to block it out. He knows it's the worst thing. He may not know why, but it must be, because his legs haven't stopped shaking, even in the moments where his panic is so severe that he feels calm. There's Zemo's face and his heavy accent voice speaking to him in cold Russian, the loud pop of a silenced gun echoing off mountains all around them. It feels like a memory from 100 years ago. He doesn't know how much time has passed, wonders numbly if they put him back in his cryopod. It's a dark, terrifying thought. He prays with every fiber of his being that that's not what happened. Missing out on his own life was hard enough, but missing out on Peter's. Bucky's mouth opens on a gasp that dies in the air, and then he's clawing at his head, the memory forced in like a battering ram and blotting everything else out, until all he can see is the red, Peter's body going limp, his son dead in his arms. No God, oh God, no, no. He can't stop begging despite the all-consuming uselessness that overwhelms him. He's too late. He doesn't even know how too late he is, but what does it matter? Whether it's seconds or years, it's the same thing. Please, he sobs, knees drawn to his chest and his hands fisted, tense and angry, in the hair falling in front of his eyes. Not this, he begs, fingers digging into his skin like he's trying to claw the memory out. Anything but this. Anything, anything. Folding in on himself, Bucky presses his face between his knees until he's curled into a ball, crazed with panic. It's his fault. In the end it wasn't even Hydra or the trigger words Zemo had stolen. It was Bucky's previous life as an assassin catching up with him. It wasn't the skeletons in his closet. It was just him, failing Peter the way he's failed every other person who has ever depended on him. He knew this would happen, eventually, but he did it anyway. Bucky forces himself to take a series of deep breaths, gulping the air down like he just resurfaced from underwater. He can feel blood and bruises forming where his fingers are digging viciously into his legs, but hardly registers the pain. It's all gone, everything they had, bled out in that field and died in his arms. He should never have laid eyes on Peter Parker. He never prevented him from getting shot, he only delayed it. Maybe it was just one of those things that was fated to happen no matter what he did, but Bucky knows that isn't true, doesn't let himself take any comfort from the thought that Peter was just doomed from the start. This isn't anyone or anything's fault but his own. A soft, persistent rattle reaches his ears and makes Bucky lift his head, straining to see where the sound is coming from through the bars of his cramped cell. It gets louder, a continuous and metallic hum that maintains its rhythm until Orby rolls into view and comes to a stop in front of the door to Bucky's cell, beeping at him happily. Bucky's mouth falls open in disbelief, then twists into a snarl as he's consumed by white-hot fury. You. Like a viper, Bucky snatches the robot off the floor lightning fast, gripping it tightly between both hands as he glares down at it hatefully. He never should have laid eyes on Peter, but Orby's the one who sent that bullet flying. You did this. His grip tightens, and Orby lets out a loud, screeching beep, its outer shell warping beneath his metal hand as he crushes it. This is your fault. It's your fault. His fingers leave deep, sharp dents in the side of Orby's face, but he doesn't stop. Not until the wail of distressed beeping devolves into quieter, sob-like chirps that sound way too pained and childlike for Bucky to ignore, even in his rage. He drops Orby's half-mangled body unceremoniously onto the cold floor, breathing hard through the inexplicable sobs that are battling to escape his throat. Orby teeters from side to side, trying to keep its balance after being dropped, deep holes in the outer shell of its body where Bucky's fingers pierce too far, exposing the vulnerable circuitry inside. One of the round camera lenses has popped from its socket, sagging loosely on Orby's face, making Bucky feel sick with guilt. Peter had given him this, had made it for him, to protect him, to keep him safe. Hours and hours of frustration and excitement and anxiety and love had been poured into making it for him, and here he is, destroying the last thing his son had ever given him. Peter would be heartbroken. But he's gone. I'm sorry, Bucky sobs, hot tears running down his cheeks and puddling on the cement floor. Through the bars, Orby beeps at him, a garbled, grieving whine. Oh God, I'm sorry, Peter. The sobs shake him to his very core. He doesn't think he can ever stop. He's ruined it, everything. Ruined the last gift Peter would ever give him, after failing to protect him like he promised he would. It's not Orby's fault, it's his, for not doing the right thing the day they met, for letting Zemo take him, for leaving Peter to die in that field. Bucky grits his teeth, his jaw creaking from the force of it. It's his fault, but it's not just his fault, it's Zemo, too, and whether he brought Bucky here to imprison or kill him doesn't matter anymore. Because Bucky's going to kill him first. He pushes himself to his feet and grabs one of the bars with his left hand, wrenching on it as hard as he can to bend the metal. It feels familiar, trying to escape from this pen, like something he's tried to do so many times he's committed it to muscle memory. It would explain why the bars are so heavily reinforced, how hard it is to distort them, even with his vibranium arm. When trying to pull the bars apart fails, Bucky leans back and begins to pummel them, filling the room with the horrible ruckus of metal striking metal, like a smith hammering on an anvil. He showers the door to the cell in a barrage of brutal punches, teeth bared and eyes narrowed into slits as he vents every shred of his helplessness and boiling rage. He's going to do the same thing to Zemo when he gets his hands on him. He's not the only one who knows how to hunt someone down. His assault is momentarily halted when Orby whines at him, loud and sharp to grab his attention. Bucky pauses mid-punch, face damp with sweat and red with anger, panting from the exertion and arm raised, prepared to strike yet again. The plates of Orby's outer shell make a terrible screech, scraping together brokenly from the dents Bucky left in them as they move. They peel back like they did when Peter showed him its inner display screen, and Bucky watches. His expression falling to one of dumb shock as Orby reveals a set of bronze keys resting inside its body. It rolls upside down, pouring the keys onto the floor, then rolls upright again and gives Bucky a mangled, hopeful chirp. Guilt pierces him from the inside like a geyser, violent and abrupt and completely destructive, shooting up from his stomach and crowding the inside of his throat until it's hard to breathe. He says nothing as he bends down and picks up the keys, but the first thing he does once he's figured out which one unlocks his cell, and the door is open, is pick Orby up and let it encase his left arm. The dents and warps in its outer shell are apparent around his hand and wrist, creating sharp ridges and jagged edges where it should be smooth and perfectly flat, but Bucky's oddly at peace with it. Good, he thinks, glancing over the blade-like shards of metal covering his knuckles and the backs of his fingers. That's gonna hurt. A chilling calmness falls over him, his eyes blazing but the rest of his face neutral and cold. It's a state of mind he's never experienced as himself, the Winter Soldier's default emotion, no thought at all except completing the mission laid out before him. It would have scared him before to know that he's capable of being the Winter Soldier, like slipping on an old jacket, but Bucky doubts anything will ever be able to truly scare him again. He heads out of the lab to the containment room where the others are kept. He's not entirely sure why Zemo brought him here, or more accurately, had Bucky bring them here, but considering the fact that he's still alive, it's a pretty safe bet that the other Winter Soldiers are what the man is really after. It makes no difference now, either way. Steve and Tony and the rest of the Avengers can handle that part. All Bucky cares about is getting his hands on Zemo, and if it kills him, at the very least, he's taking Zemo with him. His body moves silently on its own, no cognizant thought necessary at all, just one quiet foot in front of the other, moving through the base like a shadow, a ghost neither seen nor heard. He doesn't need to actively think about where he's going. He doesn't need to actively think about anything anymore. But as he reaches the end of the hallway that he knows leads to the cryopods, he hears voices, not the ones he was expecting, cold, robotic Russian in clipped, obedient tones. No, he hears Zemo's heavy Sokovian accent, and another, one even more familiar. "So this was your plan?" T'Challa asks, diffusing some of the murderous rage festering inside of Bucky. He peeks around the corner and goes numb at what he sees. Each of the cryopods has been shot, a bullet in the brain of each of the other soldiers. Bucky stares in utter confusion before trailing his eyes to the two men. Zemo is on the ground, half sitting up and half lying down, cornered against the dais in the center of the room. His face is badly bruised, and he's holding a hand against a deep wound in his side. T'Challa stands over him, in his Black Panther suit but holding his mask, a very large and very old-looking laptop gripped tightly in his other hand, to lure them here so you could tear them apart. "They were going to do the tearing," Zemo says, hissing in pain and clutching his side harder. "I was only going to provide the motivation." T'Challa glares down at him, anger and grief evident on his face, even from the other side of the room. "I almost killed the wrong man." Zemo scoffs, hardly an innocent one. Bucky flinches almost as hard as Zemo does when T'Challa smashes the laptop on the ground in front of him, not looking away from the other man's eyes, as he brings his foot down hard on the back of it, splintering it into hundreds and hundreds of pieces. Zemo stares at the wreckage of the device with a cold, defeated expression, before lifting his gaze to give T'Challa a defiant look. "You have failed," T'Challa says. "You are going to tell me where Barnes is, and then you are going to answer for your crimes." "No." Both men turn their heads to look at him as Bucky steps into the room, out of the shadows. T'Challa seems relieved for a moment, before he gives Bucky a look that almost feels like he's staring into his very soul. "Bucky." "He's not answering to you," Bucky says, his voice like ice, sharp and cold. "He's answering to me." To his credit, Zemo doesn't shrink under the weight of Bucky's glare. There's a level of dulled acceptance in his eyes, a hopelessness Bucky's surprised to see in someone other than himself. T'Challa's face hardens into a firm look, and he lifts a hand stopping Bucky from coming any closer. "I told you before, this is my mission." "I don't give a shit about your mission," Bucky snaps, too angry, coiled too tightly with rage to focus on anything but the man lying only a few feet away from him. He doesn't feel the tears until they're welling up in his eyes, can't feel anything except the blinding, deafening hate. "He killed my son." He sees T'Challa falter, and momentarily tears his gaze away from Zemo's face to watch as T'Challa's hard, determined expression slips beneath a current of confused shock. T'Challa stares at him, takes in Bucky's tense, furious posture, the busted metal of Orby's body wrapped his left hand, the tears running down his face, and the near-black stain of dried blood soaked into his shirt and pants. He sees the moment disbelief turns to horror on the man's face, and Bucky is forced to look away, the grief compelling him to sink to his knees. "Is your revenge so important to you?" T'Challa whispers through clenched teeth, sounding surprisingly close to tears himself, "that you could justify this?" It takes Bucky a moment to realize T'Challa isn't talking to him. He watches Zemo raise his other hand, the one not pressed against the wound in his side, revealing a small, old flip phone which he holds to his chest protectively. "I'm as sorry about the boy as I am about your father," Zemo says, then looks back at Bucky, his eyes narrowing. "Though I'm not the reason that bullet hit him." Bucky moves before any of them realize it, even himself. He's just suddenly on Zemo, pinning him to the dais with his right hand wrapped around his throat, pummeling him brutally with his left. There are no words, just a furious, guttural scream as he brings his fist down again and again, too angry to even take satisfaction in the way Orby's sharp edges cut and mutilate the man's face. Bucky doesn't think. There's no righteous speech, no cry of, "This is for killing my son," no gratification of any kind. He has nothing to say, he just wants Zemo dead. "Enough!" He snarls like an aggressive dog when T'Challa grabs him by his metal arm and pulls him back, yanking him to his feet. Bucky turns to shove the man off, but T'Challa grabs him by the collar of his shirt and holds him firm, forcing Bucky to look at him and refusing to let go. "You will kill him." "I am," Bucky seethes, mirroring T'Challa and fisting his hand in the hard material of his Black Panther suit, keeping him at arm's length. I'm gonna kill him, get off." "This is not you," T'Challa says, so firmly that it gives Bucky pause. T'Challa gazes at him imploringly but sincerely, staring into his eyes and actually seeing. "This is not the man you are, Bucky, you know that." Bucky shakes his head, his face soaked, in both his own tears and Zemo's blood. "Don't dishonor your son's memory by killing in his name." Bucky goes utterly still. His son's memory. That's all that's left of him now. T'Challa cautiously lets him go, and Bucky turns away from both of them, forcing air into his lungs manually, in and out, in and out. He wants to scream, can feel it resting at the back of his throat, but he knows if he lets it out now he'll never stop, just scream and scream until no other sound exists. There are other parents without children because of him, T'Challa says, and there are children without parents. The living are not done with him yet, and they are owed justice as much as you and I. He places a hand on Bucky's shoulder, a reassuring gesture, but Bucky's gone numb. Even the man's voice seems terribly far away. He will pay for what he's done, Bucky, but not like this. It doesn't matter, Bucky says. He's empty all the way inside, no idea how he's still standing on his feet. He's been hollowed out, his knees shake as his legs try to keep him upright. It doesn't matter, not a damn thing. He's not a dad anymore. No one ever going to call him that again. Behind him, T'Challa politely turns away to give him a moment of privacy, bending down to bind Zemo's hands before pulling his unconscious body off the floor. He throws him like dead weight over his shoulder, then gently squeezes Bucky's shoulder again, comforting. Come on, I will take you home. Where that, he wants to ask, but instead he nods, turning and following the other man through the base. As they reach the long stretch of hallway leading to the exit, a loud, thundering rumble shakes the earth, forcing both of them to brace their hands against the wall to keep their balance. The rumble steadily fades, and the two look at each other, recognizing the engine of a plane. Did he call for backup? No, T'Challa says. From what he told me, this was a personal mission, but I sent word to Stark and Captain Rogers when I pursued him here. He turns and gives Bucky a remorseful look, dollar clear in his dark eyes. I'm sorry, I would have told them about, but I didn't know. It's not your fault, Bucky says, because it is. It's nobody but his. T'Challa looks like he wants to refute him in some way, but he seems to shelve that thought for the moment and continues toward the exit, Zemo still unconscious over his shoulder. Bucky follows, numb even before the biting Siberian wind hits his body, his stomach churning with unmistakable fear when he sees the Quinjet parked beside T'Challa's plane, terrified of what Steve and Tony will say when they step outside and see Bucky soaked in Peter's blood. But the door to the plane opens, and it's not Steve or Tony who comes running out of it. It's Spider-Man. Dad, Peter shouts, almost tripping through the deep snow, but still rushing forward as fast as he can. Dad. Bucky doesn't breathe, doesn't make any sound. He runs past T'Challa and drops to his knees, Peter throwing himself into his arms and latching onto his body with what feels like every ounce of his super strength. Peter, oh my God, Peter, Peter. He's aware of how hysterical he sounds, smiling despite how hard he's suddenly crying, despite the sobs clinging to his every word. I don't. He pulls the kid back, grabbing his mask a little too harshly and pulling it off his face. And it's not a dream, it's real. Peter's here and he's alive and he's okay. And he's crying so hard that he has frozen tear tracks glued to his cheeks, shivering like a newborn deer. But he's okay, and Bucky can't find it in him to say or do anything except wrap his arms around him so tightly that nothing will ever be able to tear them apart again. You're alive, you're alive. He's distantly aware of people around them, in front of and behind them, but in that moment he doesn't care, not one bit. Peter's alive. Nothing else matters. I thought you were. Bucky can't even say it. He pulls him back again so he can see his face, wraps his hand around Peter's shoulder and presses his thumb against his throat so he can feel his pulse. He can't bring himself to say dead, because even thinking it makes him feel like he's going to jinx this whole thing, break the inexplicable magic spell that has brought his son back to him. How your heart. If I'd gotten there even 30 seconds later, he probably would have been toast, Tony says. Bucky looks up at him over Peter's head, sees him and Steve standing together, both ready for a fight in their respective Iron Man and Captain America get-ups. Thankfully, the UN called a couple-day-long recess on our Accords dispute, so we were already on our way home. Kid called us when he figured out something was going on, and I hopped in the suit and damn, near broke the sound barrier on my way back. Tony lifts his gauntlets, waggling his fingers like he's showing Bucky something he can't see. It's a good thing I've got a med kit built into this thing. Took lots of CPR and epinephrine to combat his pee, but I managed to keep him going long enough for his healing factor to seal up his wounds. One blood transfusion later, and he's practically good as new. Better, even in my opinion, now that he's basically half me. Bucky looks back at Peter's face, like he's searching for any sign that this isn't true. It feels too good to be. Tony must have only been seconds behind them, but obviously Zemo was prepared. There are so many things he wants to say, things he thought he would never get the chance to say again. But Peter is shaking under the harsh wind, probably only held up by the knee-high snow, so Bucky stands and takes him under his arm to start getting him back toward the plane. Steve reaches out to him as they walk past, and Bucky stops, lets him rest a hand on his shoulder, cupping the side of his neck. Bucky returns the gesture, not quite a hug, gazing into Steve's worried eyes for a moment but acutely aware of his freezing son trembling under his arm. "You're all right," Steve says, almost a question. Bucky simply nods. He's pretty sure his hair's gone white by now, but he's still too overwhelmed by his immense relief to feel anything else besides exhaustion. With a nod and an affectionate squeeze of his hand, Steve lets him go, turning back to T'Challa with a more serious expression. Bucky leaves them to it. He doubts T'Challa will hand Zemo over to Steve and Tony, but he doesn't care anymore either way. He no longer has any right to demand justice from the man, but there are still dozens of people out there who do. They can handle the rest. He takes Peter back to the Quinjet and into the cockpit, where it's warmest. Peter is still trembling from the wind chill as Bucky sits him down on a seat and kneels in front of him, the boy's teeth chattering so hard, it's no surprise he's hardly said a word. Now that he's looking at him closely, Bucky sees that Peter's eyes are half-lidded, like he's fighting to keep them open. His slumping posture is proof of how exhausted he must be. He looks as dog-tired as Bucky feels. Peter leans into his hand as Bucky wipes the lingering trail of tears off his cheeks, then pulls back, eyeing his metal arm critically. He gently grabs Bucky's wrist and holds his hand still, a frown crossing his tired face. What happened to Orby? Guilt buries him like an avalanche. Bucky resists the urge to duck his head, owing it to Peter to tell him the truth, but lightheaded at the thought of him knowing what he's done. He swallows the painful lump in his throat and gently squeezes Peter's shoulder with his other hand. "I'm sorry, Peter," he says softly. I was out of my mind with grief. I thought you were." The heartbroken look Peter gives him makes Bucky glad he's already kneeling down, because it makes him feel so sick to his stomach that his legs turn to jelly. Peter looks away, pressing their palms together and pulling his hand back so that Orby can reform between them, then holds him still between both hands so he can inspect the full extent of the damages. Orby whines pitifully, the sound broken and garbled where Bucky's fingers had crushed the ear speakers on the side of its face. Peter pets the top of its head soothingly and gives Bucky a weak smile. "It's okay, I can fix him." "I'm more worried about you than the robot," Bucky says, brushing the boy's bangs out of his forehead. "How long have I been gone? T'Challa made it sound like he was right behind us, but you're already back on your feet. How many days has it been?" It's been like," Peter makes a face like he's counting inside his head, his brows furrowing. 12 hours, no sorry 13. Stupid time change is messing me up." Bucky stares, his mouth sliding open as he tries to find the words he wants to say, but all that comes out is an angry and incredulous, "I'm sorry, 12 hours. 13. You better not be serious, Peter," he says, his sharp tone making the boy's mouth snap shut. "You're not serious, are you? Are you honestly telling me that you jumped on a plane to Siberia a few hours after you almost bled to death? That's not what I'm hearing, is it?" Peter hunches his shoulders, defensive. "I had to, Dad, he kidnapped you. I had to come save you." "Why the hell did Steve agree to this?" Bucky snaps, half a mind to march right out of this plane and wring both his and Tony's necks. "No, Peter, this is not okay. Your healing factor might be impressive, but there's no way it's fully healed a wound like that so quickly." Peter crosses his arms over his chest, but Bucky can see that the movement is careful, deliberate. He's in pain. "God fucking damn it. Dad, seriously, I'm fine." "Show me," he says, seething, his hand moving from Peter's shoulder to the emblem of his Spider-Man suit. Peter winces when he presses down on it to make the suit go lax, and Bucky apologetically runs his hand through the boy's hair, the other gently easing the top of the suit down his shoulders to inspect the wound. There are miles of white bandages wrapped around his midsection, and Bucky peels them back slowly, mindful of the tense expression on Peter's face. Terror and rage has Bucky biting back the urge to snap when he removes the last of the bandages, and sees the very obviously not healed bullet wound below his ribcage. There's a mark higher up, where Bucky guesses Tony administered the epinephrine. But it's already too healed over to tell for sure. The bullet wound, however, is swollen and purple, a gigantic bloody bruise that looks like absolute agony. No wonder Peter can hardly keep his eyes open and has barely said a word. He probably hasn't even recovered from his blood transfusion, much less from being fucking shot. And Bucky seriously doubts the exit wound on his back is in much better shape. Peter shrinks under his gaze, shivering, and Bucky rebandages his wound and helps him pull the suit back up to his collar wordlessly. He's murderously angry at Steve, at Tony, at Peter for being so goddamn reckless, but he keeps his mouth shut to stop himself from saying something he'll regret. The last thing he wants to do after finding out his son is alive is yell at him. But Peter looks like he'd prefer yelling over Bucky's angry silence, and he looks up at him nervously and assures, "I mean it, Dad, really, I'm okay. I rested the whole plane ride here. Steve made me lie down the whole time and everything. I feel fine." You died, Bucky hisses coldly, trying so hard to keep the anger at bay, but at the absolute end of his rope. Do you understand that, Peter? You aren't fine. A few hours ago, you were dead. Only clinically, Peter argues, more defiantly than he's spoken back to Bucky in longer than he can remember. And only for like a second. Dad, look, I know you're worried about me, but I'm literally healing more and more every minute. It was kind of serious, but now it's okay. I'm okay. This isn't okay, Peter, Bucky says, gesturing to the boy's chest where his wound is undoubtedly throbbing like mad just from him sitting upright. What were you thinking? If I was still, if that guy had been waiting for you with an entire team of winter soldiers, what were you planning on doing? You can't fight like this. You could hardly stand out there. How many goddamn times do we have to go over this? This recklessness has to stop. You're smarter than this. I don't understand why you... You're right, you don't understand, Peter agrees, looking equal parts mortified from being scolded and stubborn about holding his ground. He's recoiled slightly in that very small way of his, but his expression is unflinchingly obstinate, not wanting to fight but refusing to back down. I couldn't just stay home, Dad. If somebody took me away from you, would you stay put just because you got shot? Bucky squeezes his son's shoulders tightly in his hands. He almost did take you away from me, Peter. But you would have come after us, right, even if you were hurt? Of course I would have, you're my kid. And you're my dad, Peter says stubbornly, his tone begging Bucky to finally get it. That's my point. We're family and we protect each other, even if it's risky sometimes. You would do the same for me, so it's not fair for you to say that I have to put myself first when you never would. I am the adult, you are the child. It's my responsibility to put you first, Peter. That's how it works. Well, it's dumb, Peter says, a little petulantly. It's an uncharacteristically childish thing to hear him say, but he says it so earnestly that Bucky actually finds himself trying to suppress a small smile, despite everything. Peter looks like he wants to keep arguing, but the determined, defensive look on his face has steadily drained away throughout this whole conversation, and Bucky realizes guiltily that if he didn't still have his hands tightly gripping Peter's shoulders, he probably would have slumped over by now, his healing factor burdening him with intense exhaustion as it works its magic. Sighing, Bucky takes the seat beside him and pulls Peter into his side, the kid folding against him bonelessly. We'll talk about it more later, he says, holding Peter against him with his metal arm, brushing the boy's hair out of his face with the other. Get some rest. Peter relaxes against him without complaint, giving him a small affirmation that could barely be described as a hum. Bucky's not surprised by just how fast Peter slips under, given the extent of his wounds, but it does make his nerves feel painfully exposed in a vicious, primal way. He pushes the stress and anxiety down and gently moves Peter until his head is resting in his lap, then forces himself to breathe slow and steady, not taking his eyes from Peter's pale, yet peaceful, sleeping face. His own exhaustion begs him to surrender to the need for sleep as well, especially when Steve and Tony return and Steve takes the seat beside him, running his hand along Bucky's back, firm and comforting. But Bucky fights the urge, too wired and anxious to let Peter out of his sight, remaining silent and tense the entire way home. T'Challa doesn't follow them back to the States, which doesn't surprise Bucky in the slightest. He probably wants to get Zemo secured and locked away as quickly as possible, after these last few days of tirelessly hunting him down. Bucky thinks about calling him in the next few days to thank him, or even just to check up on him, but the idea is muted and far away as he helps Peter out of the car when they pull up in front of the mansion. It's almost noon by the time they get home, but after nearly 20 hours of non-stop plane travel, the four of them are so tired that it feels like midnight. Tony collapses dramatically onto one of the couches, but Steve lingers behind Bucky and Peter as Bucky leads them to Peter's room. It's a testament to how tired Peter is that he doesn't complain about being sent to bed. He crawls under the covers obediently when Bucky lifts them, still sluggish from all the stress his body been under in the last 24 hours. Peter sets Orby's broken body beside him, then lets his eyes flutter shut. He's dozing before Bucky can even finish laying the blankets back over him. Bucky sits and watches the even rise and fall of Peter's chest for a long time. He can feel Steve waiting in the doorway behind him patiently, but clearly not going anywhere. With a defeated sigh, Bucky gently kisses Peter's forehead and stands, nodding when Steve gestures for him to follow him out of the room. Bucky leaves Peter's bedroom door open as he does. He knows Friday would tell them if anything came up, but it settles the anxiety raging in his stomach just a little. In the hallway, Steve takes him by the shoulders and pulls him into a hug, arms warm and tight around his neck. I'm so glad you're okay, he says. Bucky's body sags almost of its own will, hugging Steve tight around the waist and squeezing, his face buried in the man's shoulder. I'm sorry we weren't there, Buck. He's still angry. He's so goddamn angry, it feels like all his muscles have turned to stone. But the four of them made it out of this nightmare alive, and part of him desperately wants to not waste a single moment of this second chance by giving in to his rage. When they pull apart, Steve takes him to the living room where Tony is waiting, looking slightly less exhausted than he did when they arrived home. Steve follows Tony's lead and sprawls out on the opposite sofa, beckoning for Bucky to join him, but Bucky stays standing. "How could you let him get on that plane?" Tony and Steve look at each other. Steve seems to deliberate on his answer, his brows creased with tension, so Tony unhelpfully replies, "Well, it's not like we could just leave him alone." He fixes Tony with a cold, hard look and asks, "So why didn't one of you stay?" "Because Steve was losing his shit and was frankly in no condition to fly himself to Siberia," Tony says bluntly. "We didn't know where you guys were going, we were just following Orby's tracker. This seemed like more than a two-man operation, but we didn't have anybody else to send Bucky. It's just us." Glaring, Bucky holds his ground, his body pulled tight like a bowstring. "Even if you had to leave Peter by himself." What you want us to do, strap him to his bed?" The flippant tone in the man's voice shifts then, and he gives Bucky a slightly more sympathetic look, seeming almost regretful. "I'm telling you, he wasn't having it. The kid was so worked up he was making his injuries worse. The only way to even get him to calm down enough to bandage him up was by letting him on the Quinjet." Before he can say anything, Steve sits up straighter and gently says, "I know you're worried, Buck, but we were there with him, we had a plan." "I don't care if your entire team was there with him," Bucky snaps, not meaning to sound so harsh, but the anger sends each word erupting from him like a volcano, against his will. "You could have been taking him into a war zone, and with his injuries." "Peter's a lot more resilient than you give him credit for," Tony cuts in. His eyes have hardened, dark like he's bracing himself for a fight. If Bucky didn't know any better, he'd think the man looks insulted. "I know you're a big overprotective worrywart, but Peter is not a child, Bucky. He'd probably be one of the strongest Avengers on the team if he joined. You're being unreasonable." "Unreasonable," Bucky repeats, his voice rising though he doesn't mean for it to. He needs to keep it down, he doesn't want Peter to wake up to this, but he's so painfully terrified that the words pour out of him all on their own. "For God's sake, Stark," he raises his hand, holds his palm toward the floor just below his heart. "He's this big." Tony's reply is loud and sharp enough to match his own, and whose fault is that? Bucky flinches, confusion floods out the hostility inside of him and washes it away. He watches the angry look on Tony's face dissolve almost instantly, like the words have just caught up with him, like they've shocked him as much as they shocked Bucky. "Shit," he says, lifting a hand like he's trying to stop Bucky from replying. "No, sorry, it's not your fault, that came out wrong." When he finds his voice again, there isn't a hint of anger left in it. "What do you mean, whose fault?" "Nothing," Tony says immediately. His gaze is so apologetic it's almost sickening. "It's not really anyone's fault, He can't hold the thought back when it pops into his head. "Are you saying I stunted his growth?" "Not intentionally," Tony grimaces. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? That was uncalled for, you had no way of knowing." The distraught look on his face must be apparent because Tony starts frantically rambling. "I don't think Peter knew what he was doing either, he was just, still getting used to living with you and trying to live within your means. That's not your fault." Bucky almost stumbles back on his feet, his body suddenly painfully heavy. "The food," he says, realizing. "That's why you've been so stubborn about getting him to eat." Tony's quiet for a moment, just gazing at him with the same sickeningly apologetic look, face pale with regret. "Peter's metabolism is incredible," he finally says, like he's choosing his words carefully. "But there's a downside. It takes a crazy amount of calories to maintain muscle mass, let alone encourage actual growth. I think the only reason he even grew at all is because he's at that age where his body's determined to go through a growth spurt. But if he was eating enough to maintain his mass and actually grow, he'd probably be a normal height." Bucky sinks down. If there hadn't been a chair behind him, he would have hit the floor, his legs giving out beneath his weight. "Why didn't he tell me? If he was hungry, I would have." "Remember when we talked about him having abandonment issues?" Tony asks, stronger now. "This is part of that. He was scared you'd think he was a burden if he caused you too much trouble. He would rather go hungry than risk you walking out on him." "I'd never." "We know, Bucky, you know it, we know it. Everybody who's ever seen you two together for 5 seconds knows it." He leans forward, their gazes locked together. Bucky wants to turn away from the sincerity in the other man's eyes, but he can't move. But that's what trauma and depression and anxiety do. This isn't on you, it's not even on Peter. And personally, I don't think we're too late to rectify this either. Bet you $50 that after a couple months of high-caloric intake, Peter will sprout up like a daisy. Tony smiles a little, an attempt to lighten the mood, but Bucky doesn't laugh. His chest feels like a block of solid ice, biting and suffocating. Peter had starved himself to stay with him and Bucky never even noticed. Worse, he made jokes about what a bottomless pit the boy could be, with no idea that Peter was really hurting himself all along. The failure capsizes him. Bucky realizes with only distant and dim horror that he's drowning. Steve clears his throat, sitting up a little straighter and turning to face him, one hand reaching out and resting gently on his knee. "I'm sorry for letting him come with us, Buck," he says, unwavering yet soft. "You're right, it was dangerous. You told me from the beginning that you wanted Peter's well-being to come first, and I made yours priority one instead. I'm sorry." Steve's face cracks a little, and Bucky looks up at him and feels a distinct swell of panic at the way his lips are quivering. I know what losing you feels like. And I looked at his terrified little face and couldn't stand the thought of coming back here and telling him you were gone." When he looks back up at Bucky, his eyes are wet. Bucky's stomach flips alarmingly. "I didn't want him to have to bury anyone else." Bucky bolts to his feet. He can't stand it. He turns and heads for the hall, ignoring the two of them as they call after him. He can't listen to either of them speak for one more minute. Guilt has become more familiar to him over the last 70 years than Steve ever was, but this panicked, overwhelming sensation of having the ground ripped out from underneath him, this is new. It's a guilt so mind-numbingly powerful that he feels like the ground is about to swallow him. He can't bear to sit there one more minute and listen to Steve and Tony ramble on about how much Peter loves him. Not now, when he's been forced to realize that he hasn't done a single thing right by him since the very day they met. He doesn't turn to look through Peter's open door as he walks through his own, shutting and locking it behind him. Chapter 21, moving forward. "Bucky, Peter is requesting that I unlock the door." Friday's voice pulls him from a fitful and restless sleep what feels like an eternity later. It takes him a moment to get his bearings. His body aches with a familiar, ancient stiffness, and he realizes, grouchily, that he fell asleep on the floor, sitting beside his bed with his head tipped back against the mattress. He grunts when Friday repeats herself, and forces out a sleep-heavy, "fine," that grates his own ears. He only manages to pull himself up enough to actually sit on the bed when his door is pushed open. Light streams into his dark room and makes him suddenly aware of how late it must be. "Dad!" Bucky blinks at Peter's silhouette standing in the doorway. If it was anyone else, he probably wouldn't notice the slight lean in the boy's posture, how he's subtly pressing his shoulder against the doorjamb, letting it take his weight, his arm crossing his chest to keep anything from touching it. The color in his face is better, but the pain he's in is still so obvious. I was wondering, do you want to watch a movie? Or play something, maybe?" Bucky's stomach twists like someone's trying to wring it out. The taste of bile rises in the back of his throat. "You should be in bed," he says, trying not to notice the way Peter's expression falls. "Oh," Peter shifts his weight from one foot to the other, grimaces and shifts it back. "Well, there's a TV in my room. We could watch Netflix. Or, bring in a board game or something, or one of Mr. Stark's gaming consoles." "You need to rest," Bucky insists. Then when the hurt look on Peter's face makes his throat close up, adds, "Sorry kiddo, it's just not tonight." "Okay," Peter gives him a weak, slightly forced smile and steps back into the hallway. "G-night, Dad." Bucky doesn't say it back, just drops his face into his hands after Peter has pulled his door shut and begun to walk away. Now that he's aware of it, it's all he can see. How could he not have known his own son? There's no excuse, not when he and Peter spent the last year living in one room together, sleeping 5 feet apart, sharing every meal. Peter is the most open and honest person Bucky's ever met. He's told Bucky everything, big and little things alike, and still he didn't know the boy was starving himself just to stay with him. He presses his forehead into the hard shell of his kneecap, his eyes falling shut. A horrible, intrusive thought floods into his mind, as forceful and booming as a battering ram. He was never the father he wanted to be. He was just the first person Peter met after his aunt and uncle died who didn't neglect or abuse him. That was apparently all it took, a home worth starving for. Any hint of pride or triumph he gained from that identity has been washed away in the stream of guilt cutting through him. And Tony had known, instantly. One look at Peter and he knew about the abandonment issues, about the starving, the depression, the anxiety, all of it. 5 minutes together and Tony Stark had every shred of knowledge he needed to be a better father than Bucky could ever hope to be, and the part that kills him is Peter would have been better off. A flash of Peter lying in his arms in that field flares in the back of his mind and startles him. He can still feel the warmth spreading over his stomach as Peter bled out, as his blood soaked through his clothes and stained his skin, as real as if it were happening now. He'll never forget that sensation as long as he lives. Half a step away from falling back into the Winter Soldier's mindset and still vividly, acutely aware of his child dying in his arms. Tears well up in his eyes. It never would have happened if Steve and Tony had been there. It never would have happened if he'd done the right thing and turned Peter away, or taken him to someone else. Frank and Sharon would have taken him if Bucky had asked, but he never did. It was selfishness, all of it. Selfishness and stupidity. He knew he was good for nothing. He just liked the way Peter made him feel like less of a monster, how it was harder to remember the horrible things he'd done when that kid was smiling at him like that. Peter made him feel human, and Bucky didn't want to lose that. He wanted to be Peter's dad. It was the best name anyone had ever given him. But he didn't deserve it, and he knew that. That's the worst part, really, having all his doubts collected over the last year poured over him like boiling water. He knew he didn't deserve to be called Peter's dad, and now there's nowhere to hide from that fact. He swallows the lump in his throat and wills the dampness in his eyes to go with it. A sharp, aching stab of pain spreads through his chest, remembering the first night he came here. If only he could go back in time and agree to Tony's offer, let him take Peter away. Peter would have been heartbroken, but he never would have been shot. Isn't that what parenthood is supposed to be about? Putting your children's needs before your own. He doesn't know how he could ever have the gall to call himself Peter's dad when he hasn't done a single thing right by him in all the time he's known him. The sob finally works its way out of his throat, and Bucky lowers his head, defeated. He knows the truth now, with startling and abundant clarity. Since the very first day they met, Peter has never needed him nearly as much as he's needed Peter. He tramples down on his grief as he listens to the boys' retreating footsteps limping down the hall. 3, then 4, then Tony's voice drifts in from outside his room. "Hey Pete, thought I heard you get up. You hungry?" Even through the door, Peter's voice is quieter than it should be. "Oh, no thanks, Mr. Stark, I'm okay." "You sure?" There's an edge to Tony's voice that Bucky can just barely hear, that forced casual tone, an attempt to mask how serious he is. "You haven't eaten anything in quite a while. Your healing factor needs food and rest to work the way it's supposed to, you know." "Yeah, I'm really not hungry, though." Something wells up in Bucky that feels foreign to him then. His body goes taut, and he pushes himself to his feet and wrenches the door open, stepping into the hallway and startling both its occupants. Peter looks relieved at first, until he sees the look on Bucky's face. The look of anger. "Peter," he snaps, cold and sharp, "you need to eat. Get your ass in that kitchen and get some food into you." Peter quails at the tone of his voice, completely caught off guard. Bucky, never spoken to him like that, not once. But the anger feels like a cooling balm, chases the guilt and self-loathing away for a painful, brief moment, so when Peter opens his mouth and says, "But I'm not," Bucky slams his fist into the wall almost hard enough to dent it and seethes. "Peter Benjamin Parker, I'm not going to say it again. Kitchen, now." The kid takes a step back, then another, then turns and skirts around Tony without looking at him. He heads down the hall, and Bucky watches him go, acutely aware of the way Tony's gaze is boring into him, disbelieving and scornful. "What the hell are you?" "It has nothing to do with you," Bucky says, turning to slam his bedroom door shut before Tony can even respond. He doesn't sleep anymore that night. A few hours later, Peter's soft footsteps come limping back up the hall, pausing outside his door. Bucky sits in the eerie stillness of night and waits, just listening to Peter linger there. But a minute passes and Peter doesn't knock, just carries himself away from Bucky's door and through his own. Bucky hates that he feels relieved. When the sun starts to rise, he emerges from his room and makes himself a cup of coffee. The house is silent, but he's starting to get used to that. He waits to see if Steve will wake up for some of that early morning exercise he's so fond of and join him, but by the time he's done his cup, there's still no sign of anyone else. He clears his throat, startled by how loud it is in the empty room. Friday, how much did Peter eat yesterday? Peter consumed an estimated 1,700 calories yesterday, Bucky. Even he knows that's way too low. How much does he need with his metabolism? According to Mr. Stark's research, Peter requires a daily minimum of 4,000 calories to maintain his health, and approximately 6,000 a day to encourage growth, given his current age and below-average height and weight. 6,000 calories. Peter probably didn't eat that much in 3 days, back in Queens, let alone daily. Only eating 28% of what your body actually needs probably feels damn close to starvation. Bucky's felt that kind of hunger before. When he thinks of it, the phantom ache flares up in his stomach, a pain so profound it's impossible to forget, ingrained in the very fibers of his muscles. He wouldn't wish it on anyone, not Zemo, not even Rumlow. And yet he spent the last year inflicting it on the person he loves most in all the world. Why couldn't I see it? But Tony had. It was probably the first thought that popped into his head when he laid eyes on Peter. Took one look at him and saw he was underfed before he saw anything else, the way a real parent would. He may have done his research beforehand, but that didn't mean he knew Peter, not like Bucky knew him. Or at least, not the way he believed he had. "Friday," he says, staring down at the coffee stain at the bottom of his cup, "could you do me a favor?" "I am programmed to help Mr. Stark's guests with whatever they need, Bucky," Friday answers instantly, her tone endlessly patient. "A servant who never sleeps." He would feel guilty, but there's none left to go around. "Would you be able to set reminders for Peter to make sure he eats? I don't want to yell at him again. I think I need some space for a little while. If you could remind him to eat and how much, and try to get him as close to that 6,000 mark as we can, that would help." Of course, Bucky, he has no idea how a robot can sound motherly, but Tony somehow found a way. "I will do my best to encourage Peter to ingest a sufficient amount of nutrition daily. Would you like me to inform you if my reminders prove to be unsuccessful?" Bucky's stomach twists. He thinks back to that moment in the hallway when he lost it, how Peter had looked at him. He never wants to see that look on the kid's face again, but if Friday tells him to eat, and he does. "Yeah," he sighs, hanging his head in his hands, "I'll take it from there." He locks himself in his room for the rest of the day, instructing Friday to deflect Peter and Steve as much as possible. He's less worried about Tony. The man hasn't so much as attempted to speak to him since last night, though Bucky doesn't mind. One less person to keep at bay, to shut out until he's got a grip, until the roar of blood in his ears quiets down enough to let him think. Until he can bear to lay eyes on Peter again. Whatever Friday tells Peter, thankfully, the boy does his best to listen. Bucky expected him to linger outside his door like a neglected dog, but the kid only knocks twice, first thing in the morning and again in the early afternoon, and blissfully leaves once Friday shoos him away. Steve is less obedient. He's never been someone who accepts a cold shoulder, not when he feels he's owed something, or more importantly, thinks it's something he can fix. It's a miracle that Bucky can remember how he's always been like that. Didn't matter how big the world's problems were. 100 years ago, little 5'0" Stephen Grant Rogers was out there trying to solve them. He applies the same tenacity to reaching Bucky now, trying to get through to him, trying to get him to let him in. Bucky would be begrudgingly glad of it if he didn't feel like his skin was about to split down all his seams, something dark and ugly emerging from underneath, spawned of anger and fear. He feels stuck in the Earth's gravitational pull. He can either go up, rising from the broken shell of his current self, a vessel of his own rage and hate and helplessness, or he can sink, let the guilt and the fear drag him down, collapsing in on himself like an old home weathered by too many storms. He's terrified of what he'll say the next time he sees Peter. Terrified that his anger will spill out of him again, scalding to the touch when the only person he's truly angry at is himself. There's an ugly, hateful thing deep inside of him that wants to grab Peter by the shoulders, shake some sense into him, screaming, "Why didn't you tell me?" The urge to scream it is lodged in his throat, even now, ready to burst the moment he opens his mouth. How did I not see it? "You tell me that, Peter. Why'd you have to go and hide something so important from me, of all people? How could you?" And if he's being honest, more than the anger, there's the fear of what sort of hell his mind will conjure up when he sees Peter's face. The image of his small, trembling body soaked in blood is already projected on the forefront of his mind, looping on repeat like a cheap flick at the dollar movie. The way he'd gone lax in his arms when his heart stopped beating. How heavy and light he was at the same time, so small, but dead weight in Bucky's lap. That was almost the last time Peter ever closed his eyes, and if it had been, it would have been Bucky's fault. But just after the sun sets, Friday chirps to life above him and says, "Bucky, I am worried Peter will not reach his caloric intake goal for today at his current rate." All his muscles are stiff from sitting curled up and not moving. His arms and legs unfurl from his body slowly, like an old hose being unwound for the first time in years. How many times has he eaten? Twice. I am attempting to coax him into having dinner, but he's insistent that he's not hungry. She pauses. Bucky can't help but wonder what thinking feels like when you're an AI. Is she at a loss for words or just trying to be tactful? I believe he would be amenable to having more to eat if you did as well. Tactful then, Bucky grunts but doesn't tell her to mind her own business. He's the one who asked for her help after all. It's not her fault that she's right. Time to face the music, Friday. If I may say, Bucky, you have overcome tougher challenges than this. It's going to be all right. How strange that Tony programmed her like this. It's almost sad to think of him down in his lab, hands poring over hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lines of code to get her just right, to make her kind and wise and comforting. Sadder yet to wonder if Tony was the one who really needed her, someone to tell him that it was going to be okay. None of this is Tony's fault. Some of the tension in Bucky's chest lessens and he takes a deep breath, just focusing on where his body is, what he can feel and smell and hear all around him. He should apologize. He has a lot of apologizing to do to all of them. But first he needs to make sure Peter eats. Schooling his features, Bucky unlocks the door and silently heads for the living room. Peter is curled up on the couch, zoning out to some TV show with Steve sitting beside him, quietly drawing on a sketchpad. They both notice him at the same time, and Peter perks up like a freshly watered daisy, sitting up so fast he irritates his gunshot wound, if the wince of pain he makes is any indication. Dad. Hey, Bucky says. Steve smiles at him like he hasn't spent the last 10 hours trying to burrow through his bedroom door and closes his sketchpad. Peter heaves himself off the couch and toddles close, his face bright with relief. Bucky's stomach clenches and he turns to head for the kitchen. Come on, Pete, it's dinner time. The boy is right behind him as he leaves the room, Steve's heavy footsteps not far behind. Are you feeling better? Peter asks, sounding so normal that, for a moment, it's easy for Bucky to forget that he'd been shot only 2 days ago. I made Friday promise to unlock the door if something was seriously wrong, but she didn't, so I didn't know if. Sorry, kiddo. Bucky keeps his back to him as he rummages around in the fridge, looking for something easy to make, something that can be done quickly. In the end, he decides on sandwiches and fruit, standing up and grabbing an entire loaf of bread. I'm still not 100%. The way he says it, he knows Peter understands what he really means, what he's actually apologizing for, but you need to eat. Oh, Peter doesn't try to hide his disappointment. He shuffles a little closer, standing at Bucky's side the way he always used to back in Queens, eager to learn whatever Bucky had to teach. You know, I'm feeling a lot better. I'm practically healed up already, it barely even hurts. I really only notice it when I jump off of couches too fast. A hopeful smile graces the boy's face, but Bucky can't bring himself to return it. We even did some light exercise earlier. You should have seen him. Steve cuts in from behind them, throwing his hands up defensively when Bucky shoots him a cold look over his shoulder. Come on, I said light exercise. It was practically physiotherapy, just to keep the bed sores at bay, I promise. Yeah, I didn't even get winded, Peter says, grabbing a few plates to start piling the sandwiches on. At this rate, I won't even have a scar by tomorrow. That might be a bit of wishful thinking, Steve teases when Bucky doesn't say a word. He can see the expectant look on Peter's face in his peripheral vision, how he's waiting for something Bucky doesn't have it in him to give, right now. Unable to so much as look him in the eyes. The boy's face falls when Bucky silently adds another sandwich to his plate. His shoulders slumping as he picks it up to carry it over to the table. Peter, wait a moment. Peter turns back, eager, hopeful, then wilting when Bucky simply adds another sandwich to his plate. Bucky looks him in the eyes and says pointedly, I want you to eat it all, you hear me? Then reaches into the fruit bowl on the counter, grabs a peach and adds that to the stack of fruit he's already hazardously piled. Every bite. He expects an argument, braces himself for it. Peter stares down at his plate like Bucky just handed him a dead rabbit and told him to eat it raw, fur and all. The plate is so full and heavy in his hands, he needs both of them to keep it balanced, keep the fruit from rolling off onto the floor. But after a moment, Peter looks back up at him and simply nods, gives a resigned, understanding, okay, and Bucky loves him so fiercely in that moment he wants to weep. Neither of them want to fight, and here his son is, 15 years old and keeping the floodgates closed, diverting the water when he's supposed to be the child, the unreasonable teenager. He wouldn't be able to blame Peter if the boy put his foot down, demanded to know what the fuck is going on, what this is all about. But Peter can see it would do him no good, or maybe he just doesn't want to start a fight, not after the last few days. It's moments like this, when Bucky is humbled by Peter's maturity and compassion, that make him want to latch onto his identity as Peter's dad and never, ever let it go. It's such a source of pride, until he remembers how warm the blood soaking into his lap was, how thick the scent, and the moment is gone. Bucky has nothing to do with the wise, kind-hearted person Peter is turning out to be. The only thing he'd done in the last year was put food on the table, and he hadn't even done that right. He wants to pull Peter into his arms, apologize for everything. Instead, he nods toward the dining table, says, "Go eat," and turns to head back to his room. Peter starts to follow and then stops, the footsteps that replace his too heavy to be anyone else, but Steve's. Buck, Steve says when they reach his bedroom door. Hey, can we talk for a second? Here it comes. He's surprised Steve managed to hold it in this long, to be honest. Holding his tongue was never his strong suit, and gaining a foot of height and 200 pounds of muscle didn't change that. Yeah. Look, Steve takes a deep breath, his hand warm around Bucky's wrist. We've all had a shitty couple of days, and I know there's nothing I can say to really make it better. Bucky waits, wondering when the lecture will begin, expecting this isn't like you. It's time to get your shit together. Instead, Steve surprises him and says, so I just want you to know we're in this together, Buck, you and me. And I mean for all of it, Hydra, Zemo, what's going on with Peter, all of it. If you need space right now, that's fine, I can wait. But I don't want you to go in that room thinking you have to fix everything by yourself. You have me. He embraces Bucky from behind, and Bucky lets him, warmed by the touch of Steve's forehead on the back of his neck. I'm with you till the end of the line, he whispers into his nape, squeezes him so hard, it forcefully evens out his shaky breaths. We're going to get through this together, just tell me what you need. And Bucky doesn't know what to say. He was expecting the kind of stubborn, don't argue with me attitude Steve used to torture him with when they were young, how he'd never listen to anyone, not even Bucky. How he'd unintentionally pick fights, because nothing could change his mind once it was made up. All the trouble he used to get himself into back then, how much worse it would have been if Bucky hadn't been there to pull him out, more often than not. That was the Steve he was expecting to see, catching him in this hallway before Bucky could return to his isolation. But instead, Steve holds him close like they've been lovers their whole lives, and tells him it'll be okay, he can give Bucky space if that's what he needs. Bucky wants to say he doesn't know what the fuck he needs, how could he? But he's too grateful for what Steve is offering, so he sags in the other man's arms and says, I need to be alone, comforted when Steve squeezes him tight. Can you make sure Peter eats, please? Friday can only be so convincing. Steve kisses the back of his neck and lets him go. Yeah, of course, I'll take care of it. Bucky wants to say he loves him because he really, really does. How incredible it is to find someone who will step in and take care of shit when you do know which way is up. The indescribable sweetness of that. I'll watch him, Buck, he'll be okay. Can I do anything else to help? Bucky turns in his arms, presses their foreheads together and holds them like that, still and sharing each breath. For a moment the storm quiets, the pounding headache in the base of his skull dims to a gentle thud. Steve is here. He can carry it for a little while until Bucky's regained some of his strength. Bucky can trust him, even with his son. Thank you, he says as he pulls away, answering Steve's question without saying so. Steve lets him go, stands there as Bucky disappears through his doorway, calls, I'm here if you need me, before the door clicks shut. Bucky doesn't leave his room for another 2 days. Steve brings food, but doesn't bother to knock, just leaves the plates on the hallway floor outside his door like offerings at an altar. It's hard to eat, harder to sleep. He doesn't know where to go. All of his energy is used up just trying to hold himself together, his body threatening to break apart, separating at every joint to scatter like leaves in the wind. It's hard to think about any moment beyond the one he's currently in. Every time he tries, all he can hear is that last weak gasp of breath Peter made as his eyes fell shut. Like every attempt to move forward must be immediately punished by yanking him back, thrusting him down into that field, some scornful, cosmic voice saying, see what you did, you got what you deserved. Peter may not have died in that field, but something did. The grief is immeasurable, and it suffocates him from the inside, swelling until it fills his entire body. He aches from the loss. Peter survived, but Bucky still lost his son, grieving his own fatherhood. He was a fool to ever believe something so precious could be his. He can hear them when he presses his body against the wall and really listens. Peter and Steve talking. Tony, voice edged like he hasn't slept well in days, grouchy but still making Peter laugh. The clang of dishes as they cook. The rumble of rock music as Tony finds something to work on, dragging Peter along. Steve's footsteps leading up to his door, lingering and leaving. Peter's soft voice asking Friday to let him in, Friday gently turning him away. It all blends together as the days pass. He wants to fling the door open and join them, but that insidious voice in his head sneers, haven't you done enough? On the third day, Friday coaxes him out of a restless sleep and says, Bucky, King T'Challa has returned, and he would like to speak with you. King T'Challa, Bucky had assumed the man would be too busy running his newly appointed kingdom to visit them again for a long time, if ever. Part of him is relieved. He never got to properly thank him for everything he's done for him, and part of him feels sick to his stomach. He can't fathom why T'Challa would want to speak to him, beyond to check in, to pat him on the shoulder, and ask if he's okay in that sympathetic tone that makes Bucky's bones itch. Not that T'Challa, been overly warm toward him since they met, but still. It's the only reason he can think of, and picturing it makes him acutely uncomfortable. I guess I can't refuse, huh? You dare not. Bucky smiles at Friday's tone, light and teasing. He throws on some clean clothes in a half-assed attempt to show some respect and follows Friday's directions out of the room, surprised when she leads to the back door and out onto the deck, where he spots T'Challa waiting at the end of the long dock, above the water. T'Challa turns as he approaches and smiles, though his dark eyes are as focused and calculatingly as always. Bucky, good to see you. You too, Bucky says, taking his hand. It must be bittersweet to be told, congratulations on your coronation, given the circumstances, but for what it's worth, you're going to make a good king. Thank you, T'Challa surprises him by sitting down on the edge of the dock in his expensive suit, his legs dangling off the ledge, over the water. He gestures for Bucky to join him and he does, too humbled by the whole thing to refuse. I wanted to check in, to see how you were doing. Yeah, I figured as much. Captain Rogers told me it has been a rough few days. T'Challa says, hands folded in his lap, staring out at the lake, as wise as a sage and 60 years younger than Bucky, at least. Thankfully, Peter seems to have fully recovered. Yeah, no harm done, right? Everything is hunky-dory and back to normal. Bucky barely manages to stop himself from scoffing. He's moving around a lot more, he says instead, agreeing. He's not the easiest person to place on bed rest. Too much hyperactivity crammed in that little head of his. T'Challa chuckles. They sit in companionable silence for a moment before the man clears his throat and says, I didn't come just to check on you. Bucky meets his gaze, but can't place the emotion he finds there. There are some things I'd like to discuss. Something about the way he says it sets Bucky's nerves on edge, but he simply nods his head, asking him to continue. T'Challa takes a moment, and the silence makes Bucky feel sick to his stomach. Eventually, T'Challa says, I know what Baron Zemo was after, as he gazes out at the water. You were not the true intended victim of his crimes, merely a pawn. He waits for the man to elaborate, but when he doesn't, Bucky shoots him a look and says, so who was? It is not my place to say. T'Challa's face is hard, suddenly, like he's come to a treacherous crossroads and can never go back on the road he's chosen. Not at the moment, in any case. I am hoping my involvement will not be necessary, but if it is, I will face that when it comes. It's hard to bite his tongue and stop himself from pointing out that didn't tell him shit, as if T'Challa could have possibly been any vaguer. Don't you think I have a right to know? I'm the one he kidnapped and framed for murder. You have every right to know, T'Challa says, and I hope the right person tells you, and soon, before someone has to force his hand. I have to be honest, T'Challa, I'm not following you here at all. I know, T'Challa lays a hand on his shoulder, gives it a reassuring squeeze. I apologize for not being as open about it as I would like to be. This is the way it needs to be for now. Bucky sighs but doesn't press the issue any further. He just doesn't have it in him, right now, to argue and demand answers, no matter what he feels he's owed. Even if he did, T'Challa doesn't seem like the kind of person who would give in that easily anyway, and Bucky has too much respect for him to waste his breath trying to find out. Now that Zemo is in custody, I've had some time to think about everything that has happened, T'Challa says, his tone almost somber. There are a lot of things I wish I had done differently, but I can't change the past, only the future. I know what you mean, Bucky says. I can't go back and save my father, no matter how badly I want to. There is no helping him now. Bucky can feel his grief, swelling in the space between their bodies, as evil and consuming as his own. But I can still help you, Bucky, and I would like to, if you will allow me. He swallows the sudden lump in his throat. With what? Reclaiming your life. Wakanda is not the third world country the world believes it is. He says it proudly, like he's been waiting to say those words his entire life. I plan to make that fact known to the rest of the world within the coming days. Once I have, my legal team will no longer have to pose as members of neighboring nations. They are some of the best in the world, and I have already given them your case. With your consent, I will spearhead a campaign to exonerate you of Hydra's crimes, and when we win, you will once again be a free man. Bucky petulantly wonders if he's ever truly been a free man, for even a moment in his entire screwed-up life. And if we lose? We must take every action possible to ensure we do not. Silence descends on them as they sit together, side by side on the edge of the dock, just staring out into the blue water. Bucky knows what T'Challa is really offering here. He'd probably let him take Peter to Wakanda to hide away in the jungle for the rest of their lives, keeping the world off their scent if Bucky asked. But he's offering something better, a genuine chance to get back some of the life Hydra stole from him, and all the joys that would come with it. A higher risk, sure. But a much higher reward, as well. It's a heavy choice, but one Bucky knows, ultimately, he's already made. T'Challa waits for him to speak, pretending to be focused on the view, as if they both don't already know what he's going to say. I can't be a free man while I still have these trigger words in my head, he says at last, almost thinking out loud. As long as I'm still the Winter Soldier, nobody's safe from me, especially not the people I love. And you will not be granted exoneration as long as those words still hold any power over you, T'Challa adds. I imagine even with our impressive legal defense, any trial you face would demand proof that you are truly free of Hydra's conditioning, once and for all. We will have to prove beyond all doubt that you have free will and therefore should be a free man. Easier said than done. He brings one leg up onto the dock, bends it in front of him so he can rest his arms and chin on his kneecap. You know, before all this, the only thing I wanted was to be a good dad. T'Challa looks sideways at him, like he's trying to figure him out. And now? He grinds his teeth, unable to meet the other man's gaze. Now I know better. I don't know, it sort of feels like I've lost the right to want anything, big or small. Bucky, T'Challa says, none of this is your fault. It is though, Hydra Zemo, sure I had no control over that, but the rest of it, I knew better but I did it anyway. I let Peter into my life when I knew that someday it would all catch up to me and he'd be in danger. I let him get hurt. He wants to pull at the strands of his hair, he can feel every single one piercing his scalp. I might as well have pulled the trigger myself. T'Challa's hand descends on his shoulder again, and it's more of a comfort than he'd expect, given how every one of his nerve endings are lighting up like a Christmas tree. He doesn't deserve to lean into the touch, but he can't bring himself to shrug it away. You just never learn, do you? You are human, Bucky, just like the rest of us. No one can blame you for wanting Peter, and you should not either. Peter needed you when you found him. Maybe things weren't perfect, but you did the best you could. That is all any of us can do. Bucky doesn't say that his best, his honest best, would have been calling Steve, or pounding the pavement in an attempt to find Peter a better home. He doesn't want to argue about the validity of his own guilt, because there's not much anyone can say to abrogate what he knows to be true. He gambled, took a risk no one should ever take, and in the end it was Peter who was harmed. At least this time, if he takes the risk T'Challa's offering him, the right person's neck will be on the line. Once we remove Hydra's conditioning from your mind and clear your name, you can have that life, T'Challa assures him. You can be the father you want to be. Believe me, my friend, at the very least, you deserve that much. Even if he does, Peter sure as hell deserves a lot better. But maybe this is how he can make amends, how he can prove he really does deserve to call himself Peter's dad, that he'll do anything for his son's happiness. Maybe this is how he escapes the gravitational pull threatening to drag him down and pull him up at the same time, not by deciding to sink or take flight, but to simply move forward. The only thing he knows is that he owes it to Peter to try. I want to help you, T'Challa says, his grip tightening on his shoulder. Please, Bucky, let me help you. And Bucky needs it, knows he has for a long, long time. So he exhales shakily, releasing the tension built up in his chest and gives one single, exceeding nod. Okay, he says, acutely aware of the gravity of that single, tiny word. What's the plan? When he steps back inside the house, the silence of it deafens him. T'Challa has gone, but this time, not to return to Wakanda. He'll back in a day or so, maybe sooner. The time has already begun to tick away. He can feel it slipping between his fingers like sand through an hourglass. He goes to find Peter, but there's no sign of the kid anywhere. Friday informs him that Peter and Tony are happily preoccupied in the lab, and he heaves a relieved, defeated sigh and heads for the kitchen. Steve is seated at the island counter, curled around a steaming mug, looking lost in thought. He perks up when he notices Bucky enter the room and smiles, though it does nothing to hide the signs of exhaustion clinging to his features. Hey, how'd it go? Bucky pours himself a cup of tea, letting the bag steep as he considers his answer. Something tells me you already know, he says eventually. Steve sighs. It doesn't need to be said out loud, and they both know it. Bucky grabs his cup of tea and takes the seat beside Steve, letting their arms knock together, sitting side by side in silence. He surprises himself when he opens his mouth and says, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Steve. If Steve is surprised to hear him say that, he doesn't show it. He moves one hand from its sturdy grasp around his mug and intertwines his fingers with Bucky's, comforting. You are, he says, gentle, but with the kind of confidence that makes you want to believe him. It's going to be all right, Buck. People keep telling me that. A soft, sad smile crosses Steve's face. He lifts Bucky's hand, gently kisses his metal fingers. I want to go back to New York with you, he says, as if they haven't spent hours talking about doing just that at great length. Together, as a family. I want us to build a home together, the three of us, you and me and Peter, maybe even Tony on the weekends. Bucky chuckles, warmed by the syrupy sweet smile Steve is kissing into his hand. I want us to finally have the life we dreamed about having when we were Peter's age. But you can't change the past, none of us can, only the future. I gotta be honest, Steve, I don't remember what we were dreaming about back then. I know, he hates how sad Steve sounds, how resigned, such an out-of-character thing. There's a lot you don't remember, Bucky. That's why this is the right thing, I promise. Bucky's chest suddenly feels tight, like some great big frog leapt up and sat on it. What do you mean? Steve doesn't look at him. Do you remember your family? When he tries, there are glimpses of color that shine through the white fog, faces that should feel familiar, but not quite. He has memories of events sometimes. He knows his father saved up for 4 years and bought him a car when he turned 16. He remembers his mother cooking him his favorite dish, knows she always smiled when he ate the whole thing. He knows their names, but their faces, the sounds of their voices, his actual mental picture of them. Even if Hydra hadn't done their best to erase those things, Bucky doesn't know how much of it he'd be able to remember. It was a lifetime ago. Sort of, he says at last, a cop-out, but the only honest answer he can find. I know I had parents, who they were, stuff like that. Steve watches him like he's waiting for a very specific reaction. It unnerves Bucky, the way the other man's eyes are suddenly mapping out the side of his face, like Bucky's a live grenade, and Steve is trying to figure out when he'll go off. Can you remember anyone else? You, Bucky says, but he can tell right away that that wasn't what Steve was looking for. There's something else, something specific. He racks his brain, trying to find the missing piece Steve has apparently deemed so important. Did I have siblings? He knows that's at the moment it leaves his mouth. Steve is still looking at him like he's the most complicated thing in the world, but there's enough of a shift, a big enough change in the clench of his jaw for Bucky to know he's struck pay dirt. I think my biography at the Smithsonian mentioned it. I can't really remember, Steve, sorry. I don't think their names were mentioned. Is that what you're trying to tell me, that I have flesh and blood out there somewhere? Grief washes over Steve's face. His hand tightens around Bucky's. You had one sibling. Younger, you were the big brother. He looks away from Bucky and back down at his cup, which stopped steaming long ago. They're no longer alive. I checked as soon as I got out of the ice, but I brought it up because the last time I mentioned them, you blacked out in my arms. Realization dawns on him, chilling him to the pit of the stomach. In the gym, that day I bruised your arm. All I did was mention their name, Steve says. That was all it took. That's how bad Hydra's programming is still affecting you, Bucky. It isn't just the trigger words. Nausea rages hot and angry in his gut. He knows Steve is right. There's an inkling at the back of his mind, a faint light trying to cut through the darkness. Hydra's taken more from him than even he knows. They took his freedom, his responsibilities as a brother and friend, his very humanity. They would have taken Peter too if he'd let them, and he almost had. I don't want Hydra to have any power over you anymore, regardless if all their members are dead or captured. I want you to get back the things you've lost, Bucky, and I want you to have new things too, and you can't do that, not the way things are now. Not until your name is cleared. And that can't happen until we can get that stuff out of your head. T'Challa says he can help, so that's why. I know, Bucky cuts in because he does better than anyone. I know, Steve, you're right. He keeps his head down, forces a deep breath down into his lungs, trying to soothe the anxiety roiling inside of him. T'Challa says he can find a way, and that's the best shot we've got. That's why I need to go with him when he goes back to Wakanda. He turns to look up at Steve, but Steve's eyes aren't on him, so wide he can see every speck of green in the bright blue of his irises. Bucky swivels in his chair to follow Steve's line of sight, wondering what has him so clammed up, and freezes at the sight of Peter, paralyzed at the mouth of the hallway, staring back at him, his big eyes just as wide and filled with fear. Chapter 22, End of the World. The house is quiet like it's been empty for years. Tony had appeared briefly to inquire what all the commotion had been about, but Steve was quick to divert his attention. Bucky isn't sure where either of them has disappeared to now. He figures that, in a rare moment of situational awareness, Steve realized that this is something Bucky needs to handle on his own, and made himself and Tony scarce to make it as easy as possible. Not that there's anything that can make this easy. His head is still pounding. He's been waiting for hours, hopping against hope that Peter will cool down on his own and come out to find him, but the boy seems to have adopted his dad's method of handling grief, running away and hiding, and hasn't been seen or heard from since he stormed off several hours ago. He had been so angry. Angry and hurt. Bucky stares down at his hands, wishing he could trade every ounce of his superhuman strength for the power to make this all better. He hadn't wanted Peter to find out this way. He didn't even get a chance to think about how to tell the kid, never mind when or where. And Peter had turned and run before Bucky could even think of what to say to smooth it over. He's leaving for Wakanda. And Peter isn't coming with him. Bucky sighs and leans back, head tipped against the back of the couch, staring up at the ceiling. At the new drywall and fresh paint, still pristine from Tony's recent upgrades to his AI. It reminds him all over again of the small repairs he and Peter had made to their apartment in Queens, all those long months ago, and his heart catches in his throat. He has failed Peter so many times since the day they met. Over and over, every day that he didn't realize the kid was starving himself, he failed him. He failed him by taking him in when he knew better. He failed him with every breath they shared in each other's presence, knowing that one day the skeletons would emerge from his closet. He failed him by letting him get shot. And he's failing him now. Tears prick at his eyes, but Bucky clenches his jaw and wills them away. Let it be the last time, he thinks, prays. Let this be the last time I have to fail him. He knows it's the worst thing. Breaking the one promise Peter needed him to keep above all others. Breaking the boy's heart in the worst way either of them could imagine. But he has to, if he doesn't want to fail Peter anymore. And he doesn't. With a deep breath, Bucky pushes himself off the couch and heads down the hall, where Peter's bedroom door remains as firmly shut as it's been for hours. "Pete," he calls, rapping his knuckles against the door. There's no answer. "Peter," Bucky tries again, knocking a little firmer. "You gonna come out and talk to me?" The boy doesn't respond. If possible, Bucky's heart sinks even further. "Come on, we need to talk and you need to eat something. You wanna come help me get dinner started?" The silence on the other side of the door is deafening. Bucky swallows down a hurt sigh. "You wanna make some noise and let me know you're okay, so I don't have to break the door down?" Nothing. Then after a moment, the door rattles with a distinct, angry thud, like something was flippantly thrown against it. Bucky does sigh this time, disappointed and unable to help it. "Thanks, kiddo," he says, giving the door a single farewell tap before he turns and leaves. When Steve resurfaces from wherever he'd been hiding, his handsome face is damp with sympathy. He wordlessly wraps an arm around Bucky's shoulders, holding him tight, and it's startling how comforting the small gesture is. Bucky ducks his head and presses it against the other man's neck. "I hate this, Steve." "I know. What am I supposed to do? He won't even speak to me." "Just give him time." Steve kisses the crown of his head, moving his arm to pull Bucky into a proper hug. "He needs time to himself just like you did, Buck, to come to terms with everything and process it, and be upset if he needs to. It doesn't mean you love each other any less. You guys just need some space right now." "We're about to have nothing but space," Bucky says. The implication brings a fresh wave of panic, anxiety rippling through him. He needs to know why I'm doing this before I just up and abandon him. He can feel Steve frown against his cheek. "You aren't abandoning him." Bucky's fists clench around the back of Steve's shirt. "It'll feel like I am." "He'll have support," Steve promises. "He's a smart kid, Buck, don't sell him short. He may be upset, but ultimately he'll understand you're doing what you need to do and he'll forgive you. And until he gets to that point, he'll have all the help and care he needs. This is the right thing." "Is it?" They both startle at the sound of Tony's voice, standing at the opposite end of the room, arms crossed over his chest. It's a pose that should look casually disapproving, but something in Tony's posture seems entirely defensive, self-protecting, far from the invincible, intimidating stature that Iron Man usually has. Tony raises an eyebrow at the two of them when neither responds. "I'm not convinced that this isn't just adding salt on a very fresh wound," he says. "Barnes, that kid has abandonment issues up to his ears. He just got you back after that psycho Zemo kidnapped you to Siberia. You've spent 98% of that time since you got back hiding away in your bedroom, hardly speaking to or even looking in his direction. Now you're going to get on a plane and fly to Africa for God knows how long. And do the one thing you swore you were never going to do. You don't strike me as cruel, but I can't think of any other word for it." He can't help but flinch. Steve's face hardens like granite and he snaps, "Tony, back off." "I'm not going to stop you," Tony says, not backing off in the slightest. "But I think you should know, you're about to put that kid through hell again." "I don't know what else to do." He shrugs out of Steve's arms, pulling away from both men and running his metal hand through his hair. "T'Challa's right. If I don't go through with this, I don't have a chance in hell of winning my trial. If I lose my trial, we'll be separated when I get locked up or executed. If I don't go through with the trial at all, then either Peter and I have to stay in this house for the rest of our lives, or we separate anyway so he can have some semblance of a normal life. That's all I get. Those are the only options I see. But if you see something else, Tony, if you've got some genius secret plan, hell, I'm begging you, please tell me." Tony only holds himself more protectively, and the ember, the tiny shimmer of hope Bucky still felt flickering in his chest, is promptly snuffed out. Helplessness hangs heavily over all of them like a thick, cloying sheet. The moment is broken when Tony makes a loud, frustrated sound somewhere between a sigh and a groan and snaps. "What's so good about a normal life anyway? I'm a billionaire, T'Challa's a billionaire. Between the two of us, we could set you guys up on a secluded tropical island somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, where you could sit around getting tanned and fat and chased by coconut crabs for the rest of your lives. We could figure it out. It would work. It could be a good life." In spite of himself, Bucky smiles, the mirror opposite expression of the desperate hopelessness on Tony's face. "It could," he agrees softly, "but that's not what I want, Tony. Not for Peter and not for myself." Tony almost looks pleading as he says, I'm not going to bullshit you and say I have all the answers when I don't. I don't know what the other option is. What I do know is that Peter won't be able to handle being left alone. He's not there yet. His voice nearly breaks. He doesn't strike Bucky as the sort of man who's used to begging for anything, but his next words come almost naturally to him. Don't do this, Bucky, not to that kid. I know I said you two have some serious space issues, but running off and leaving him alone is not the answer. Something dawns on Bucky then. A wordless feeling, a vague confidence he isn't sure how to name. He steps close to Tony, meeting the man's panicked brown eyes with what he hopes is a calm expression, feeling that same calmness wash over him, smothering the anxiety. He lays his hand on Tony's shoulder, near his neck, holds him firm and says, I'm not leaving him alone. Tony's gaze searches his, then flicks over to Steve. Don't take this the wrong way, but I think Cap, going to be a bit too much of a nervous wreck to properly play daddy daycare while you're gone. I wasn't talking about Steve, Bucky says. I was talking about you. Me, Tony says aghast, like no one has ever acknowledged him before in his life. You what? I'm not leaving Peter alone, Tony. I'm leaving him with you. You troglodyte, the man seethes. Cut the bullshit. That is so much worse. He doesn't know how, but despite everything, he finds himself laughing at the stunned, outraged look on the other man's face. I'm serious, Tony hisses. Barnes, this isn't funny. Peter isn't going to be placated by playing Weekend at Bernie's at my penthouse. It won't lessen the sting of what this will do to him. That won't, Bucky says, agreeing. But you will, Tony. The man opens his mouth to argue again, but Bucky takes him by the arms, reassuring, I know that this is going to hurt like hell. You're right, it is. But Steve's right too. Peter isn't going to be alone. It'll be hard, but he's going to be okay. Tony's voice is whisper quiet. How do you know? Bucky smiles and says, because he'll be with you. He pats the man's shoulder, firm, comforting and final, with someone who loves him as much as I do. It takes a little coaxing from Steve, but Bucky manages not to break down Peter's door when the boy shows no sign of coming out of his room that night. Steve isn't offended when Bucky declines his invitation to sleep together in his room. He doesn't doubt the physical contact would be comforting, but he'd rather stay as close to his kid as possible, even if Peter's still refusing to talk to him. He wants the boy to know he's nearby and accessible should he wish to talk, and Steve, knowing his presence might hinder that somewhat, graciously retires to his own room to sleep. Bucky never been more aware of how much he doesn't deserve him. After all, Steve is losing him too. He can't come with Bucky for exactly the same reasons that Peter can't. The reasons they still need to talk about if only Peter would come out or let him in. If only he would give Bucky the chance to explain, to comfort him, to try and make it better, futile as it may be. He stares up at the darkened ceiling of his borrowed bedroom and ignores the voice whispering, insidious, you deserve this. After all, this is exactly how Peter must have felt. The last few days, lying awake at night and wishing Bucky would just talk to him, would let him in instead of pushing him away. Even if Steve is right, and both of them are justified in needing their personal space, this feeling is near unbearable. The loneliness of it throttles him. Friday, he quietly calls, is Peter asleep? The AI almost seems to hesitate. No, Bucky. He's out of bed and out the door without a second thought. The boy still doesn't respond or make a sound when Bucky knocks, not even when he says, Peter, I know you're awake. But that's all right. Taking a deep breath, Bucky turns and presses his back to the boy's door, gently sliding down until he's sitting in the dark, empty hallway. Not a single sound comes from inside the room. Bucky rests the back of his skull against the door and says, Peter, you don't have to come out or let me in or even talk to me. I won't force you to talk about it if you're not ready. I get it. There's something I need to say to you. He inhales slowly, hoards the breath possessively in his lungs. I was scared to look at you after you got shot. He swallows the lump in his throat. He didn't want to talk about this. He still doesn't. But Peter deserves to know why Bucky pushed him away, the same way he deserves to know why he's leaving. Why he's breaking his promise. I was scared of remembering what that moment felt like. I was scared of remembering how it felt to have you die in my arms. I thought, when I woke up in Siberia, I just kept thinking to myself, he's gone. He's gone, and I'm not a dad anymore. No one will ever call me that again. Tears well up in his eyes, but Bucky doesn't will them away this time. But then you were there, just like the night we met. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there you were, and it felt like I had been given a second chance. Like this identity I'm so irrationally, possessively fond of wasn't being ripped away from me after all. You were alive and I could still be your dad. It was like the universe was telling me, do it again, but do it right this time. I felt like we could, like I could start over, that I could still somehow find a way to do right by you. He laughs, but it sounds more like a sob, and for a moment Bucky can't be sure that it is. But then we got home. We got home and I started to give Steve and Tony hell for letting you come along in the shape you were in, but Tony made me realize that of the three of us, I'm the one who's hurt you the most, the one who's been hurting you since day one. Peter doesn't say anything, but there's a shift, a creak, the muted tapping of bare feet on the hardwood floor. Bucky waits to see if the door will open, but the room is silent once again. Peter, how could you starve yourself just to stay with me? How could you do that? He waits, holding his breath. He had been so afraid to ask, though he knows the answer. He knows Tony is right. He knows Peter most likely didn't even mean to do it. And he knows, more than that it's his own fault that he didn't see. He starts hesitant, afraid to say the wrong thing when things are already so broken. I had thought the universe was giving me a second chance. But at that moment when Tony pulled the blinders off, God, Peter, cry freeze wasn't as cold as I felt. I wasn't a grieving man being given a second chance to be your dad. I was a fool who was being forced to realize how delusional I had been. I'm not your dad, and I never was. I'm the Winter Soldier, and I had no idea what the fuck I was doing, and you're the one who suffered for it. His metal hand feels cool against his heated face. He doesn't bother wiping the tears away. It was like the final puzzle piece clicked into place. This was why it, whatever the hell it is, God, fate, the universe, doesn't matter, saved you. So it could lift the wool from my eyes and say, you can't lose something you've never had. It felt like my whole world was coming down around me, Pete. That was the one thing I thought I did right. I took you in, loved you, gave you shelter, kept you fed. I thought it was the thing I did right, but it was. And that was when I realized, I got you back, but I still lost my son. Because I had no right to call myself your dad when I'd been failing you every step of the way. The door thuds gently, and though he knows he can't, Bucky swears he can feel Peter's warmth through the solid wood, can feel him sitting so close, only a few inches separating them, yet so painfully far away. I didn't know how to make peace with that revelation, kid. I didn't know how to make it okay. I just wanted to get you away from me, so you could finally be safe, truly safe. I felt undeserving of even looking at you. I sure as hell didn't deserve to be loved by you or love you back. He leans harder against the solid door, hopping somehow that Peter can feel him too. But then T'Challa showed up. He can't help but smile, broad and bittersweet. I didn't disappear into the night like I wanted to because I know, kiddo, more than anything, I want this. I want our life together, even if it can't be the way it was. Maybe we can't ever go back to how things were back in Queens, but with T'Challa's help we can still be a family. It's a chance I have to take, Peter. Because more than anything, more than my guilt, more than my fear of fucking it all up, I want to be your dad. He feels another shift, turns around in time to see the door wrench open, and catches only a flash of Peter's tear-soaked face before the boy launches himself into Bucky's arms, clutching him tightly around his neck, sobbing painfully into his chest. You were always my dad. The force of the hug knocks the wind out of him, but doesn't stop Bucky from gripping Peter desperately tight and cradling him in his arms. He leans against the door jamb, shushing and rocking the boy who shouldn't be as small as he is, holding him like it's the only thing he was made to do. Like despite the lifetime of war and death and grief that says otherwise, he was born to be this boy's father. It's not your fault, Peter cries, pulling away from their embrace long enough to gasp the words out between his sobs. It wasn't, the eating thing, Dad, that wasn't your fault. Bucky pushes a lock of wet curls out of the boy's tear-stained face. I should have seen it, Peter. I should have known. No, Peter says, glaring up at him, beating the heel of his palm against Bucky's chest. No, just stop, just listen. The eating thing wasn't your fault, Dad. That started a long time ago, way before we even met. Bucky blinks, hardly daring to breathe, but still manages to gasp out, what? I had to learn to suppress it a long time ago, when I was bitten. Peter looks up at him, his eyes wet and red-rimmed and dark. He still looks so angry and utterly heartbroken. Bucky runs his metal hand through his hair, soothing him, and watches the boy suck in a much-needed breath. Remember how I told you that I had to keep my powers a secret from my aunt and uncle? He asks, and when Bucky nods, he says, well, things started off pretty rocky. I was suddenly taller and more muscular and didn't need glasses, and then I was hungry, like all the time, to the point I was literally eating us out of house and home. My aunt and uncle were really worried. He takes a shuddering breath, but relaxes when Bucky places a comforting hand on his shoulder. They want to take me to a doctor, to get like a full-blown examination done. I was scared shitless of what they'd find and what my aunt and uncle would do if they found out. I didn't want them to be mad, or be burdened more than they already were. So I controlled what I ate, all the time. I was really careful to never eat enough to alarm them. After a while, it just became habit, and then the hunger wasn't even really a feeling anymore, if that makes sense. It was always there, I was able to ignore it. He fixes Bucky with that same look again, hurt, betrayed, but fierce, too fierce and determined, and behind that ferocity, fueling it, that well of love. I wasn't starving myself to stay with you, Dad. I don't know where Mr. Stark got that idea from, but he's wrong. And you always did right by me. Always. From that first night we met when you saved my life to all the times you saved me after that. Don't you dare. The tears start flowing again as Peter grabs him by the collar and shakes him. Think you were ever anything less than my hero. Because you are. You're my hero and I. The anger on his face crumbles into despair, and he hangs his head and sobs, I don't want you to go to Wakanda. Bucky yanks him into another hug, his heart in his throat. Peter wasn't hurting himself to keep them together. It feels almost too good to be true, though he still feels like he should have known, the way Tony had, but he feels relief too. Immense, immeasurable relief, siphoning a lifetime's worth of guilt from his body like gasoline. And heartache, too deep to see the bottom of, when he forces himself to say, I have to go, Pete. Why? Peter sobs out. I don't understand. Why can't Mr. T'Challa help you here? Because everything they need to help me is in Wakanda, including his head scientist. And the entire legal defense his lawyers are constructing is based on me being in Wakanda. The prosecution will want proof. I have to go. Why can't I come with you? Peter lifts his head, pins him in place with those wide, puppy eyes. I can homeschool. I can still graduate on time, even if we're overseas. At least we'd be together, please. His heart sinks into his stomach. I want more than anything for you to be able to come with me, Peter, he says, running his hand through the boy's curls again, but that would be worse for you than staying here with Tony, trust me. The boy doesn't look convinced, only hurt and impossibly, inconsolably heartbroken. Why? Bucky takes a deep breath, holds it, and says, because they don't know how to get these trigger words out of my head yet, kiddo, and until they do, they're going to put me back in cryo-freeze. He watches the words sink in, watches the confusion turn to disbelief to rage to sadness, all in one eternally long fraction of a second. Peter's shoulders shake with his sobs, his head bowed, his hands trembling as he wrings the fabric of Bucky's shirt between them. We could run away, he sobs out, choking on the words. Like we planned before. We could go somewhere they wouldn't find us, Dad. You don't have to do this. We could, Bucky agrees gently. He cups the boy's face in his hands and lifts it up so their eyes can meet. But I don't want you. I don't want either of us to have to choose between having a normal life and being a family, Peter. I want to do it right this time. No more running and hiding. He wipes away the boy's tears with each thumb. I want to get these words out of my head. I want to step foot on American soil as a free man again. And I want to take you back to New York. I want it all, Pete. An apartment we don't have to constantly fix up by ourselves. You, me, Steve, hell, even Tony. I want it all. Birthdays and holidays and being forced to watch the same 6 Star Wars movies on repeat forever. I want to be there when you graduate high school, when you graduate college, if you get married, if you have kids. I want that. I want us to have that life. He pulls the boy in and presses their foreheads together, holds him, doesn't let him look away from his eyes. I want to adopt you. Peter's wet eyes slip closed, his jaw clenching as he swallows down the sob hammering in his chest. In that moment, Bucky knows he understands. Things have changed. It's no longer enough to run away and hide. If they want to be able to call each other family in the light of day, this is something Bucky has to do. The boy leans in, presses their foreheads firmer together, and whispers, heartbroken but sure, okay. Despite Bucky's insistence, and Peter's begrudging acceptance of the situation, no one is exactly thrilled when T'Challa's plane lands 2 days later. Peter leans into his side as they watch the plane descend, its floats extended in preparation to land on the water. It hardly makes a splash as it makes contact, gliding to an easy stop at the end of the long dock protruding off the back porch. He's here, Peter says, quiet and sad. Bucky hugs him around the shoulders. Yeah, he is. The boy's lower lip trembles. Bucky can tell he's thinking very hard about something. He looks conflicted and unsure of himself. But ultimately he clenches his jaw in that stubborn way he definitely picked up from Steve, stealing his features as best he can, choosing to stay silent. Bucky had expected him to beg him not to go. But Peter somehow always surprises him. Friday slides the back doors open for T'Challa when he approaches. He nods at them as he enters, though he doesn't smile. Bucky figures this must at least partly be bittersweet for him too. Good morning, Bucky, how are you feeling? Bucky hugs his son tighter against him and mulls over his answer. hopeful. Peter's fist tightens in the back of his shirt. T'Challa nods again. I'm glad to hear it. As am I. He looks up as Tony walks in, looking haggard, like he hasn't slept in days. Bucky wouldn't be surprised if that's exactly the case. Stark. Your Highness, Tony greets. He glances over to the rest of them with no small amount of trepidation on his face. Glad to see we're all keeping it cheery in here. Steve rolls his eyes but doesn't reply. Bucky just holds Peter tighter when the boy leans harder into his side. Okay, well, there goes my best shot, Tony says. He turns back to T'Challa. You guys sticking around for brunch, or is it, a Thundercats Argo type of occasion? The king stares Tony down. I wasn't trying to make a cat pun, for the record. T'Challa snorts. I would prefer not to linger, and something tells me Bucky will feel the same. T'Challa looks up at him, and Bucky nods, feeling Peter wilt beneath his arm. If you are ready, Bucky, I have left the door to the cabin open. I will join you on the dock shortly. The sympathetic look T'Challa gives them turns to something else, something grim and determined, as he looks back to Tony. I must speak with Stark first. Alone. Oh, that doesn't sound good, Tony says, and he and Bucky share a look of confusion. Bucky wants to ask what T'Challa needs to speak with Tony about, but when he looks back at the man, he finds him locked in a stare-off with Steve. Steve doesn't look nearly as calm as T'Challa does. Now Bucky really wants to know what the hell is going on. But Peter's shoulders tremble underneath his arm, and Bucky is pulled out of his curiosity at the sight of silent, grief-stricken tears streaming down the boy's cheeks. It's all right, Pete, he says, a piss-poor attempt at consoling him. The boy merely wipes his face dry, giving him a curt nod in lieu of a verbal reply. Tony approaches awkwardly, looking like he's not quite sure what to do with his hands. I'm getting the impression we're supposed to say our goodbyes here then. Bucky looks up at him. He's not sure what exactly possesses him to lock his free arm around the man's neck and pull him in for a hug, ignoring his startled yelp. Still, he finds himself smiling as he pats the shorter man firmly on the back. Tony looks confused and indignant when he lets him pull away. Bucky just smiles wider, clapping him on the shoulder. Take care of yourself, Tony, he says, watching the other man try and fail to appear emotionless. And take care of my son. You know I will, Tony scoffs. Bucky drops his hand and Tony hesitates a moment before holding his own hand out to shake. I'll take care of him. You'll hate it. You'll only have him back for a day before he's asking to come hang out with me some more. Trust me, it'll sting like a bitch. You'll chase me off with a broom the next time you see me. Bucky laughs and shakes his hand, inexplicably grateful for the unexpected friend he's found in Tony Stark. And Tony starts hesitant. Take care of yourself too. Go get better. I'm not a babysitting service. Go get that brain scrubbed and polished and then get your ass back here. We'll be waiting for you. I'll miss you too, Tony. Yeah, shut up. Get out of my house. Bucky can only grin. He looks down, hoping to find Peter smiling up at them, but the boy's face is pale and his gaze far away. Sighing, Bucky lifts his arm, taking the boy's shoulder in his metal hand instead. Come on, Pete. Come help me load up the plane. Peter wordlessly grabs Bucky's one and only bag and steps through the doors. Bucky waits for Steve, who is still locked in some kind of tense, professional-level staring contest with T'Challa. He pauses in the doorway and calls, "You coming?" Steve reluctantly tears his intense gaze away, his body taut like a bowstring as they step outside. "Good luck, Barnes," Tony calls. He looks distinctly uncomfortable for the level of sincerity in his own voice when Bucky looks back at him through the sliding doors. "Thank you again, Tony," Bucky says, "for everything." The man nods and Bucky turns back to the dock, where Peter is standing at the very edge, dwarfed by the shadow of T'Challa's plane. "You mind telling me what that was all about?" Bucky says to Steve, quiet, so no one else can hear. "I have an idea," Steve answers, clearly still very tense. "I just hope I'm wrong." Bucky regards him thoughtfully. Now is colossally not the time or place, I'm guessing. Steve barks out a humorless laugh. "You have no idea." "Well," Bucky shrugs, nudging the other man with his elbow. "Cheer up, Stevie, it'll work out." "I need your head in the game," he says. Peter does. A guilty sigh leaves the man's lips. "You're right, I'm sorry, I'm just stressed." "I know, it's okay." "I still think this is the right thing," Steve says. "I still think T'Challa is doing us an incredible favor. I'm just stressed about everything." "I think we're all feeling that in varying degrees." He gives the man a look, firm but not unkind. Stressed is fine, just don't shut down on me. I need you to make sure Tony is sleeping every night and eating something besides organic coffee beans so he can take care of my kid. A wry grin spreads across Steve's handsome face. I'll watch over them, Buck, I promise. I love you, Bucky says, before he can worry if that's a weird thing to say, here and now of all places and times. Steve looks at him sharply, startled, mouth agape in shock, but his eyes are a little misty, and he doesn't look uncomfortable despite the breathless look on his face, so Bucky figures it was fine. Probably. When they reach the end of the dock, Steve pulls him into a hug so tight Bucky swears he can hear his bones creak. He buries his face in the other man's neck, breathes in his familiar, comforting scent, and lets the embrace say all the little things he could never find the words for. When they pull away, Steve cradles his face and says, I'll be waiting for you, Buck. Bucky smiles and kisses him, hand tight on the back of his head, his grip gentle. I'll see you soon, Stevie, he promises as he pulls away. And turns back to Peter. The boy isn't looking at him. He's staring up at T'Challa's plane, gently wadding in the calm waters. His eyes are wet but his cheeks are dry, and when Bucky steps up beside him, he fully expects the boy to break down and beg him not to get on board. But Peter looks over at him and says, Have a safe flight, Dad. For a moment, Bucky's heart stops, thinking he's truly hurt Peter beyond repair. For him to say a thing like that, to change so suddenly, from the small child who would cling to him at even the smallest thought of Bucky leaving, to this unfamiliar young man who could say goodbye like it's no big deal. Bucky momentarily drowns in the guilt of thinking how badly he's clearly hurt his son. But then he sees it. He looks closer and he sees how hard Peter's fingers are digging into the material of Bucky's bag, how tightly he's holding his whole body like it might crumble apart at the smallest touch, how defensive his posture is, turned away from Bucky, distant but not disdainful, held back, deliberately, consciously restrained. Peter's lower lip is still trembling, his eyes still glossy with unshed tears, and Bucky sees. He sees how close Peter is to flinging himself into his dad's arms and begging him to stay. How hard Peter is fighting to be mature about this, to keep his head up, to not make this any harder than it needs to be. And God, does it make Bucky want to fucking bawl. Because Peter knows. He knows that neither of them wants this, that Bucky doesn't want to leave him behind, that he doesn't want to get on that plane and watch the thing he loves most in all the world get further and further away. Peter knows this is Bucky's absolute last resort. So he doesn't beg or sob or cling to him desperately, refusing to let him leave like a child. Even though he clearly wants to. Ironically, it's Bucky who clutches Peter to him and almost confesses that he can't do it, he can't let him go. But Peter's trying. He's trying to be grown up and let Bucky do the right thing. So Bucky kisses his cheek, cradles his face and says, I love you more than you will ever know, kid. He tries and fails to keep the tears in but still manages to smile, pressing their foreheads together. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Wait for me, Peter. I swear I will come home to you as soon as I can. I love you too, Dad, Peter says, his voice unwavering, which is clearly a struggle. His legs are shaking. His hands, when they come up to gently hold Bucky's wrists, are pale and cold. I'll be waiting, so don't forget your promise. He closes his eyes and bumps their foreheads together. I'm really grateful to you for being my dad. That's good, kiddo, 'cause I'm planning to be your dad forever. Peter opens his eyes and smiles. Bucky smiles back, holds his son a moment longer, and lets him go. And an explosive blast tears through the serene quiet of the woods. The three of them startle and look back toward the house, stunned at the sight of smoke billowing from the roof. Steve instantly moves to check it out, but pauses when Iron Man jets into the sky, not pausing or even turning to look at them as he blasts over the horizon and out of sight. What the hell, Bucky says. Steve doesn't answer, just stares, dumbstruck, as T'Challa steps through the doors. He looks impassive, if a little tired, and not panicked or concerned in the slightest. What was that about? Bucky asks when the man reaches them. Steve still hasn't said a word, his gaze shifting between the back of T'Challa's head and the plume of smoking still rising from the house. Something that was a long time coming, T'Challa says, his voice giving absolutely nothing away. It would be best not to dwell on it for the moment. What's done is done. Is Mr. Stark okay? Peter asks. Is the house on fire? Bucky adds. T'Challa gently takes his shoulder, using what Bucky can only describe as his king voice as he says, We have to be going, my friend. Captain Rogers can handle things here. Bucky looks over at Steve, who seems to snap out of whatever internal spiral he was lost in, worry practically rolling off of him in waves. Steve. Taking a deep breath, Steve forces a smile onto his face, walks over and takes Bucky's hands in his own. "Go, Buck," he says gently, "I've got this." "Okay," Bucky says unconvinced, "if you're sure." "I'm sure." Bucky looks down at his son, staring at nothing with that faraway look in his eyes, and thinks to himself, I wish I could say the same. T'Challa's hand drops from his shoulder. It's time to go. Bucky kisses Steve one last time, leans down and presses his forehead to his son, stands and promises them both, "I'll be back, I promise," and steps aboard the plane. He takes his seat, waving to the man he loves and the son he would kill and die for standing together on the dock, and watches as the plane starts to move, faster and faster, until it breaks away from the water and into the clear mountain air. Then he looks down at the dock and succumbs to a fit of sobs when he sees Peter, collapse to his knees, crying desperately with Steve's arms wrapped around him. "Oh God," he thinks, blind with panic, "I'm sorry, Peter. I'm sorry, I'm so fucking sorry." T'Challa, as gracious as ever, bestows some privacy on him by returning to the cockpit. Bucky manages to keep his breakdown mostly silent as he curls up against the window, crying fitfully, praying against all logic that his son can feel, can know, how badly Bucky wishes it didn't have to come to this. His shuddering breaths are interrupted by a gentle, comforting beep. Beside him, his backpack wiggles, and Bucky knows that familiar binary sound, unsurprised when he unzips the bag and finds Orby peering up at him. He manages a huff of laughter and takes the robot into his hands. "Hey, buddy." Orby chirps happily. Bucky's fingers trace its outer shell where only days ago he had crushed and mangled the robot's body almost beyond recognition. There's no sign of any of that damage now. The robot looks good as new. It even seems to have forgiven Bucky, as if the whole thing never happened. Nobody to remember the horror and grief and guilt of that moment except Bucky himself. How familiar a thing that is. "I know this is the right thing," he confesses, confiding in Orby's big black eyes that always remind him of his son. "I know it is, but God, that doesn't make it easy." He sobs again, curling over the robot in his lap, crying helplessly. "I want to see him, I want to see my kid. God, Steve, I don't know if I can do this. I want to see my kid." After a moment, Orby lets out a quiet, affirmative beep. Bucky looks up when he feels its metal body shift. He watches the curved plates move and change, revealing the little black screen hidden below its shell. Orby's ear speakers rotate to project up at him, and the screen lifts so it's easier to see, and after a moment, a video starts to play. A video of Peter. He's down in Tony's workshop, sitting across the table from Tony himself. Bucky assumes it was Friday who recorded the footage, judging by the bird's-eye view of the two sitting across from each other. He wonders, for a moment, if this video was something Peter saved onto Orby's hard drive, or if Orby accessed Friday's archives to stream it to him directly. That train of thought ends when Tony speaks up. "This is a safe space, Pete. Don't be scared. You can tell me if you need help. That's why I'm here." Peter looks nervous as hell, and Bucky recognizes the scene all of a sudden. The day Tony gave Peter his new Spider-Man suit, when Bucky had barged in on them. The day Tony begrudgingly called Bucky Peter's parent for the first time. This footage, he realizes with a slap of surprise, is what must have taken place before he barged in. He leans closer to the screen and listens. "Mr. Stark," Peter says quietly, "please don't take this the wrong way, but you're sort of the last person I'm going to feel safe around right now." Tony hides his surprise much better than Bucky. "Why is that, Peter?" Peter's arms tighten where they're crossed over his chest. "Because you're trying to take my dad away from me." "Okay, I hear you, but you have to understand, kid, that guy out there. He's not the friendly drifter you think he is. I get that you two have bonded, but he's not your dad. He's trouble with a capital T. He's probably the most dangerous person you'll ever meet, even if you continue being Spider-Man." "You're wrong." Tony leans back in his chair, nothing but confident. "Enlighten me." Peter exhales and runs a hand through his unruly hair. Bucky's thumb gently traces the movement, wishing he could do the same. "I know about his past," Peter says softly. "I know why you're so worried about letting me stay with him. But he's not dangerous, Mr. Stark, not to me. I can't really explain it, but I know he would never hurt me." Tony sighs and rubs the back of his head. "Kid." "Just listen," Peter pleads. "You said I could talk, so please, Mr. Stark, just listen." Tony holds his hands up in surrender. "You've got the floor, kid, I'm listening." Peter says, frowning, trying to formulate the words. He looks up past Tony, to that distant, faraway spot he always focuses on when he's overthinking something. Mr. Stark, he says, very quiet, do you know what it feels like to be alone? Tony doesn't reply, though he gestures for Peter to continue after a long, silent moment. I don't mean like lonely or friendless or single, Peter says. I mean alone. Do you know what that's like? To know that in the whole world at any given time, not a single person is thinking of you. Tony's face falls. After my aunt and uncle died and the foster system gave up on me, there was a time when I was alone. And when I knew that it didn't matter. It didn't matter if I lived or died. Nobody would know either way. If I just vanished one day out of thin air, nobody would know I was ever there at all. I was invisible. I had literally nothing. Bucky's heart lodges in his throat. He has never heard Peter sound like this. This crushing, inescapable hopelessness. I had nothing, Mr. Stark. Not even the comfort of knowing someone somewhere was thinking of me. I didn't even take up space in other people's minds. I had no reason to. I had no reason to be alive. I wasn't suicidal. I just had nothing. I had no one. I was clinging to my schoolwork and my dream of being Spider-Man because I didn't have anything else to attach to. Not even a home to feel safe in. He expects the boy to cry at admitting something so painful, so clearly traumatic. But Peter's voice, though quiet, is even and calm, detached. His eyes are distant but dry. He's holding himself protectively, but he's loose. He looks wrong. It's all wrong. This isn't the boy he knows. The night I met Bucky, Peter says, I had been wandering the streets aimlessly for hours. I wasn't looking for trouble, I wanted someone to see me. I wanted someone to look at me. I wanted someone to talk to me and think of me, even if they didn't really care, it didn't matter. I just wanted to know I existed to someone else. That if I died without warning like my parents and my aunt and uncle, that anyone would be aware of it. Bucky thinks back to the boy he met that night. The hopeful, cheerful, bubbly sound of Peter's timid voice. How eager he had been to follow Bucky home. How lively he seemed to be for a kid who almost just got shot in the face. How Bucky had slammed the door on him without a single word. What did Peter feel in that moment, when the only person to have acknowledged him in weeks pushed him away so vehemently? He's scared to find out, but in spite of himself, Bucky continues watching. I ran into a guy who had been mugged, and I chased the muggers down this alleyway, trying to get his wallet back for him. But something was off. Normally I can, sense danger. I have a sixth sense that tells me when there's trouble, like a built-in warning system. But when I was fighting these guys, Mr. Stark, it was silent. It was dead silent. Bucky's entire body goes cold. You know, Peter says, smiling, but now there are tears soaking his face. For a second, I thought I was already dead. Like even my own senses didn't know I was there. That I mattered so little. My own body didn't think it was worth the effort of keeping me alive. How could you ever think that? Bucky whispers, dampening Orby's screen with his own falling tears. One of the muggers pulled a gun on me and I froze because I was certain, really, Mr. Stark, I was positive that this was it. This was exactly what I'd been scared of, and it was inevitable now. I just shut down. I didn't even have regrets really in that split second. I just froze. I wanted it over with. I was so tired of being alone. Peter, Tony tries to say, but the boy shakes his head. He isn't done, and Bucky is terrified to hear what he has to say next, but he needs to. He has to know. Mr. Stark, Peter says, wiping his wet face, have you ever had someone tell you to listen to your gut? Like if someone gives you a bad feeling, you should listen to it, even if it doesn't seem to really make sense. Bucky can hear the confusion in Tony's voice as he answers, yeah. Peter smiles, hugs himself tighter. The guy had a gun in my face and he pulled the trigger. I really thought I was already dead, but suddenly there was this guy, in front of me. He came out of nowhere and I didn't hear or feel him approach us. It was like he materialized just to save my life. The boy sobs, but he's grinning. He's grinning that familiar sunshine grin, and Bucky loves him with every fiber of his being, loves him more than words could possibly express. And when I looked at him, I just knew, Mr. Stark. It was that gut feeling, only instead of warning me to stay away, it was screaming, you're safe now. It was the opposite of my spider sense. Instead of danger, all my senses were telling me that I was going to be okay. Finally, after months of searching, someone found me. Someone saw me and he helped me. The boy wipes his face, his smile fading into a more serious look. I don't care what anyone else says about him. I felt good about Bucky the first moment I saw him. He doesn't care if T'Challa can hear the guttural sob that rips its way from his throat. He couldn't keep it in if he gave it everything he had. I know what Hydra made him do, Peter says. I know some of their conditioning is still affecting him, and I know what he's capable of, but none of that changes what he is to me, Mr. Stark. Bucky took me in, he saved me. He took care of me and he listened to the things I had to say. He looked for me when I was late coming home. He scolded me when I was reckless. He worried about me. He wanted me. and he became my dad when I needed that from him. I really don't care if you and the rest of the world think he's dangerous, because being around Bucky is really the only time I ever feel safe. And Bucky had left him. Just got on a plane and left him on that fucking dock. There's more to the video, Tony surrendering, cheering Peter up, presenting him with his new state-of-the-art suit, but Bucky isn't watching anymore. The screen goes black a few moments later, and Bucky's confronted by the sight of his own face, drenched in tears. He watches helplessly as Orby reforms itself, the screen covered once again by its outer shell, its eyes and ears sliding back into place, good as new. The robot gives him a small, hopeful beep and Bucky sobs, and holds it to his chest in a tight hug, cradling it, biting back the urge to scream. Thank you, he sobs out, though the guilt is heavy enough to crush him so badly, he feels like he might never stand up again. Wait for me, Peter. I'm going to come home to you, I swear I will. He wonders if Peter still believes in his promises, after he broke the only one that ever mattered. And yet Peter had never held that against him. He hadn't once accused Bucky of going back on his word, or thrown his words back in his face. No, in the end, he hadn't even asked Bucky to stay, though Bucky could tell he was dying to. He just held his tongue and told him to have a safe flight, as he stood there and watched his whole life get on a plane and leave him. He thinks of that last sight of Peter, collapsed at the end of the dock, and bites the back of his fist to stop himself from screaming. I'm sorry, Peter, I'm so fucking sorry. The guilt eats at him, but there's more too. Beneath the guilt, the self-loathing, the grief, there's stubborn, bullheaded, foolhardy determination. Bucky lets Orby encase his metal hand and clenches his fist, jaw tightening as he wills away the tears. I'll come back to you as soon as I can, he vows, head tipped against the plane window. I promise. He doesn't get a chance to see much of Wakanda, though truth be told, he wasn't expecting to see any of it at first. After brief introductions with T'Challa's head scientist, his sister, who reminds Bucky way too much of Tony, he's led to his new cryo-freeze chamber, prepped and briefed on what to expect. T'Challa stands with him as he's helped inside the container. I will be waiting for you when you wake up, he assures, and Bucky smiles at him through the glass window of the door. Commence freezing in 5, 4, 3. Bucky takes a deep breath. 2. Holds it. 1. And lets it go. Chapter 23, Trials and Tribulations. Some part of Bucky, if he's being truly honest with himself, had expected to be frozen for years. He underestimated T'Challa, really, when it comes down to it. He never would have assumed that, only 2 months after he went into cryo-freeze, the king would be waking him up with good news. And really, it was some of the best news Bucky had ever heard. Princess Shuri is, without a doubt, the smartest person Bucky has ever met. The technology she designed, engineered and perfected to remove the trigger words from his head, makes every engine he's ever worked on seem like a kid's toy in comparison. He doesn't understand a word of the eager rundown she gives him as he's hooked into the machine, but her infectious enthusiasm is familiar and comforting enough to soothe his anxieties. He closes his eyes, listens to the steady hum of the machine powering on, and thinks of his son. It had been the first thing he had asked about when T'Challa unfroze him. He is doing well, T'Challa had said, draping the thermoblanket over his shoulders. Captain Rogers tells me he is thriving in school, and has more good days than bad ones as of late. I know he misses you terribly. Steve was the one to tell you that, Bucky had asked, not Tony. No, T'Challa's face gave nothing away, but Bucky got the feeling there was something the man wasn't telling him. I know they returned to New York and are staying at Avengers Tower, but I believe Tony has had his hands full. With the Accords. T'Challa's voice had held a touch of finality as he said, among other things. He still answered every question Bucky could think to ask about Peter, trying to catch up on every moment he had missed in cryosleep, but there had been little time for much else. To his surprise, the trial to exonerate James Buchanan Barnes was already well underway. T'Challa's legal team had already flown to New York and had been in court for weeks already, presenting the first half of their defense to the jury. Hence why, mere hours after being woken up, Bucky finds himself hooked up to Princess Shuri's latest feat of technology, listening intently to every sound it makes as it scans his brain. At least he isn't strapped down. T'Challa already warned him there would be no time for much else until the trial is over. After the trigger words are removed, Bucky will need to undergo a long and arduous series of tests, first for Shuri, then his own defense lawyers, and then the prosecution. Between those tests, as per Wakanda's agreement with UN, he will be held in a secure holding cell to await his day in court. The cell, he learns after his first session in Shuri's brain purifier, is as high-tech as the rest of the princess's lab. It's a square little room, all white, behind a heavy metal door that has to be at least a foot thick. He knows he's under constant supervision here. The UN must have demanded it. There's a camera in every corner, and they follow his movements, honed in on him like they're being controlled manually. They don't stop, not even when T'Challa visits him, which is often. Bucky thinks the king might be giving a subtle fuck you to whoever demanded that Bucky be locked up each time he comes to visit, because he never demands that Bucky be restrained, the way the UN representatives do. He sits with Bucky on his cot, casually, to show he feels completely unconcerned. He'll bring him meals and they'll eat together, sharing news with him of the outside world, news of the Avengers. He doesn't mention Peter. Bucky isn't allowed to ask. It's for the best, he knows, but the separation is tearing him apart. He is watched constantly for any possible flaw, any slip-up, any snag in the story his defense lawyers have spun in court. The UN doesn't know about Peter. They don't know that Bucky spent the last year living in Queens with an orphan child. And if Bucky wants to keep Peter out of this whole mess, it has to stay that way. It makes it hard. He can't make any move that acknowledges Peter's existence, not even to confide in his friend. The closest thing he has to his son in this sterile white cell is Orby, who stays wrapped around his arm, hidden in plain sight from the cameras. Occasionally, Bucky will place his left hand over his heart, and through some vague, unpredictable programming he doesn't understand, Orby will clue into what he wants and hum softly, in short, gentle beats, mimicking the heartbeat of the one who made him. He wonders how T'Challa managed to negotiate that he was allowed to keep his arm, but regardless of what the man had to do, Bucky is grateful. He's grateful for a lot of things when he thinks about it. He's grateful only 2 months have passed and not a decade like he secretly feared. He's grateful T'Challa is just audacious enough to treat a global terrorist like him as a close friend in front of the entire world. He's grateful for Shuri's help and for the progress he's made because of it, and that from everything T'Challa and his lawyers tell him, the trial seems to be going well. He's grateful that, on the other side of the world, his child and his partner are thinking of him. It takes 5 sessions with Shuri's machine before she declares that Bucky is trigger-word free. The testing he undergoes to confirm this is long and arduous, not to mention repetitive. It's one thing to run through the routine with Shuri, who he has come to trust quite deeply in the 3 weeks he's been awake, and another entirely to go through it with the Dr. T'Challa insisted he have, or the 6 other medical professionals sent by the UN to vet him, or worse yet, the lawyers. But Bucky manages. He gets better about it too. By the 4th attempt, he hardly flinches at all when he hears the words. By the 6th, his jaw barely tightens. On the 9th, T'Challa insists they leave him unrestrained as they read them out. He'll need to be perfect when they test him in court. The less he reacts, the less he lets the trauma and anxiety overwhelm him, the better it will look to the jury. The Dr. T'Challa assigns to him focuses mainly on that goal, above all else. She meets with him 3 times a week for one-on-one sessions, a trauma specialist with expertise in psychotherapy, and Bucky can't help but wonder what Tony will say when Bucky tells him he finally got the therapy he was so adamant about. The thought cheers him up. Thoughts of what Steve would do if he were here cheer him up too, even though he knows the man would be pissed. He wouldn't be as tactful or respectful as T'Challa in his protests of all the UN's demands, and while that would make everything harder, might even jeopardize the whole thing, depending on how snarly Steve would get. Picturing his pissed-off, tough guy face does make the shittier moments of this ordeal a little easier to bear. But the only thing that gets him through the truly harrowing moments, the moments when he's strapped to a chair, surrounded by men who want to see him executed, above all else, when the trigger words are echoing in his head, and he's consumed by terror that they might still hold some power over him, the only thing that gets him through are thoughts of Peter. The sun beyond the storm clouds, that's what Peter is in New York waiting for him. Sometimes Bucky thinks of before, comforting himself with those cherished memories of their shithole apartment, of teaching Peter how to cook, of training him, of lying awake at night, staring at the love seat, watching the gentle rise and fall of the boy's chest as he slept, safe and sound. There's comfort in those memories, tangible things to cling to in the darkest moments of this process. And sometimes, when he needs that extra boost of determination, when he's exhausted and tempted to give up, certain the mountain ahead of him is too steep to climb, he thinks of after. He thinks of being back home before summer is over. He thinks of going out, no disguise needed, walking through Central Park as himself, as Bucky Barnes, a free man. He thinks of taking Peter to play catch on the diamond, of forcing Steve to brave Coney Island with him like when they were kids. He thinks of the little things, mostly. A quiet life with his partner and son, helping Peter with his homework in the evenings, introducing Steve to Frank and Sharon. Of the apartment the three of them will share, decorated to the nines with every knick-knack and science project Peter has ever brought home. He thinks of their home, a warm, safe place. He thinks of taking trips upstate to go horseback riding again, their small, unorthodox, perfect family, camping out underneath the stars. He thinks of the life the three of them will have, and he has hope, and the mountaintop suddenly doesn't feel quite so far away. Whenever Bucky feels like he can't do this, he thinks of Peter, of the boy he plans to someday call his own. And is reminded that he can. That he has to. Unexpectedly, the thing that haunts him the most isn't the laundry list of people he's killed, even though he's remembering more and more of them every day. Not all. Shuri's machine didn't restore every memory, and despite his therapist's best attempts, there are still many gaps that remain blank. The hundreds of people he's killed over the years is a stain that he knows will never wash out, but for his part, he's made his peace with it. Some of it is partly thanks to his therapy. He hasn't necessarily forgiven himself, but he's made a start. It sounds less like bullshit to his own ears when he tells himself that he is not responsible for what Hydra made him do. He can't say he fully believes those words, but he doesn't fight them as hard as he used to. It's not much, but at least it's something. So his bloody past isn't the thing that keeps awake at night. Most nights, lying in his cell and trying to think of his family back home, waiting for him. The thing that haunts him is the family he already lost, the one Hydra ensured he would not remember. Becca, his baby sister. It had been a shock when that particular block was moved. He didn't quite faint, but it was a near thing, and he suspects he has Shuri entirely to thank for the fact that he remained conscious. This is what Steve had been trying to tell him, the thing he'd been so afraid to speak of after what happened in the gym. Bucky Barnes, Bucky's only living family, his favorite person in all the world, the girl he raised after his parents died, that spirited little rugrat who idolized him. Who watched him fly off to war, and died believing he was never coming back. He had asked T'Challa almost immediately for something of Bucky Barnes that had to still exist, somewhere, a photo, a relative, a grave, anything that Bucky could see, could hold in his hands and remember her by. He had practically begged for it the moment the shock wore off. The next day, T'Challa brought him exactly what he wanted. In his cell, constantly under surveillance, unable to speak of or acknowledge the family he has waiting for him in New York, Bucky still has this. Images, texts, pages and pages of things T'Challa was able to find, archived, Bucky guesses, because of his connection to Captain America, and by association, Becca's connection. Pages and pages of archived letters they exchanged while Bucky was overseas. Not the originals, no, just typed up copies, but he remembers the words vaguely enough to know they're authentic. Becca's letters to him, a brainy little kid who was twice as articulate as her thick-headed big brother. He remembers that she was the first person to ever call him Bucky. He remembers almost all of it when he flips through the pages and finds one filled with photographs. Old, scanned copies of his childhood photos, black and white family portraits that he can hardly remember posing for. They'd had money, his family. He can remember a large print of the four of them that hung above the hearth in their great room, proudly displaying the Barnes household to all who entered. He remembers Becca's face. The one photo of her, taken at his mother's insistence, he's sure, is taped to his wall beside his cot, and most nights he stares at it as he waits for sleep to take him. Her mop of floppy brown curls, her big dark eyes, that mischievous little grin that never fooled him not once, her pigtails, how she made him tie her hair up in them every single day, the way she clung to him when she fell and fractured her knee, rocking her to sleep after their mother died, though she was too old for it, and holding her up that long made his arms ache. How he did it anyway, every night, without fail. Teaching her to play catch when she got jealous, he was spending so much time with Steve, teaching her how to ride a bike, taking her for ice cream, to Coney Island, making sure she was fitting in at school, that the boys weren't teasing her or the girls excluding her, offering to help her with her homework even though she never needed him to and wasn't shy about telling him as much. His baby sister. She lived a long life but didn't marry or have children. Bucky prays that in spite of that she found her family the way he found his. With every fiber of his being, he clenches his wet eyes shut and prays she found that place she could call home, desperately trying to block out Peter's words echoing sadly in his head. Do you know what it feels like to be alone? To know that in the whole world at any given time, not a single person is thinking of you. Did anyone think of Becca after Bucky fell and Steve crashed into the ice? Was she alone the way Peter was? Did she die like that? Bucky lets himself sob. He holds it together for everything else, the therapy, the tests, the interrogations, the isolation, the inability to ask about, see or hear from his kid, all of it he keeps it together, but not with this. With this, he lets the dam break as often and as violently as it wants to. Becca was the center of his entire world. She needed him. She depended on him, and he didn't even know she had ever existed when she died. It was Peter's greatest fear. And it had happened to his kid sister. At least, unlike Peter, Bucky can discuss Becca in therapy. Some days that's all he can bear to talk about. Others, he flinches away from the subject like a scared animal. It's not an easy thing to predict what kind of turmoil he'll be faced with when he hears her name, but like with most things in his current life, Bucky isn't given much choice. It may be a tad naive, but Bucky genuinely feels hopeful the day he is finally extradited back to the US. Even with the armed security detail, the impenetrable military plane, the vibranium cuff tying his right hand to his belt, having his left arm, and all be confiscated begrudgingly by T'Challa, somehow he still feels hopeful. He's warned time and time again that this is the hard part, but he just can't see it. A weight's been lifted off his shoulders, and naive or not, he's going to enjoy the momentary relief. The jury has come to their decision. James Buchanan Barnes is not responsible for Hydra's, for the Winter Soldier's, crimes. It means at the very least that execution is off the table, which is no small victory. T'Challa warns him over and over again that this is the hard part, this is the true test. The second half of this trial, to determine whether or not Bucky Barnes, through no fault of his own of course, is a danger to society. If he should be allowed to live a free life after all the things he's unwillingly done. If he's a threat to himself or others, if he can be trusted. The prosecution had been watching him like vultures for weeks, circling, waiting to make the kill, for Bucky to slip up, get angry, show any sign of instability that they could point to and say, see, he's an animal, not a man. He can't ever be allowed to walk freely like one. It's their entire ballgame now. Label him as dangerous, a victim, yeah, sure, but a dangerous one, and lock him up as far away from civil society as he can get. They're going to try to push you, his lawyer tells him, preparing him for his first day in court. They'll be intentionally shitty, Barnes, you name it, insults, jabs, cruel jokes. They're going to want you to react, to get angry. Play the sympathy card, but don't get hysterical. No blubbering. You have to be composed, but still human and relatable. Think you can do that? Yes, he says, he can. This is exactly what he's been preparing for. The jury's opinion of him, now, is everything. It will be the difference between freedom and confinement. They have to believe he is well enough to live among them, after his defense lawyers worked so tirelessly to prove he has a right to. Almost there, he assures himself. It's almost over, Pete. His holding cell in New York is a pretty significant downgrade from his one in Wakanda, but Bucky's glad enough to be back on American soil that he doesn't really care. He's allowed to keep his folder, of Becca's letters and their family photos, of the address of her gravesite, and between that and the knowledge that it's almost over, he doesn't need much else. At least, he thought he didn't. As they're outside of the courtroom, Bucky, his team of lawyers and T'Challa, waiting to be called in, Bucky hears a familiar voice call his name and realizes, instantly, he needed something much more. He turns and grins, tired, but relieved more than he can express, at Steve's smiling face. Buck. Hey, Stevie. The guards look a little intimidated, but they don't stop Steve from surging forward and crushing Bucky in a hug. Bucky can't hug back, one-armed with his hand fastened to his belt, but he can still lean heavily into the other man's chest, and it's good enough for them. I've missed you, Steve breathes out. Bucky presses into his shoulder. They have to pretend it's been much longer than it truly has. Despite how badly he wants to, Bucky can't ask where Peter is, if he's well, if he's been doing all right the past 3 months. But somehow, when he pulls away and looks into Steve's confident, steady blue eyes, he knows the answers. I've missed you too. You ready for the big day? Bucky smiles, first of many, I've been warned. Yeah, Steve agrees, but it's almost over, Buck. Bucky takes a deep breath, nodding. It's almost over. The first day in court, Bucky is restrained in front of the jury and forced to listen to the prosecution read his trigger words aloud in clear, clipped Russian. He maybe plays it up a little too much, but as his lawyer said, his performance has to be perfect. So Bucky holds still and listens to the words fly at him like stray bullets. He keeps his face calm but not robotic. Towards the end, he lets the barest hint of PTSD-related worry bleed into his expression. And when it's over and the last word is read loudly and with purpose in the silent courtroom, Bucky embraces the sappy, relieved grin that spreads across his face. It's maybe a little dramatic, but it gets the job done. He makes eye contact with a few of the jurors, knowing his smile is infectious, practically glowing when a few of them cautiously smile back. That's right, he thinks, playing the room, turning to look at Steve and T'Challa in their seats. This is my victory, and you're all celebrating with me whether you like it or not. Steve looks ready to roll his eyes at him. but T'Challa gives him an approving nod. He passes the first test, but it's the second one that really matters. Taking the stand. His own lawyers question him first, and it's the sort of softball questioning he's prepared for. Describe what it was like waking up in DC. What were you thinking? What were you feeling? Did you have contact with anyone from Hydra in the 2 years it took for the Avengers to find you? Why didn't you seek out the Avengers for help? Why didn't you reach out to Steve? Bucky's rehearsed his answers in his head 1,000 times, but he knows he can't let them sound rehearsed. They have to sound authentic, genuine, sympathetic but not concerning. For the most part, he succeeds and manages to toe the line between sincere and manufactured responses. He tells the truth, only omitting the vital pieces, the ones no one can know about, protectively keeping every mention of his son to himself. As far he can tell, the jury, for the most part, looks convinced. Hydra was everywhere, and Bucky, a good man, was trying to keep the world safe from the Winter Soldier by keeping as low to the ground as possible. Most, thankfully, seem to believe them. And then the prosecution takes the floor. Now Mr. Barnes, the lawyer, an older, blonde, smarmy man leading the opposition's line of questioning, says, "Once more, can you tell us what happened the night that Brock Rumlow, Crossbones, as he's known in the industry, found you?" Bucky frowns. Of all the places he thought they would start, he really didn't think it'd be there. Rumlow cornered me and attempted to trigger the Winter Soldier's mindset. I was able to overpower him before he could finish. The lawyer hums thoughtfully, "And how did you manage that?" Bucky stops short. This man, Brock Rumlow, a spy for Hydra, and one of the many S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who turned out to be a double agent, he was your handler, correct? During your time as the Winter Soldier? Yes. So professionally, it was this man's job to wake the Winter Soldier, for lack of a better term, and command him. Would you say that's correct? Primarily, Bucky says, yes. And yet, the man smiles at him. Despite having you alone, secluded and 2/3 of the way into activating the Winter Soldier's mindset, by your own account, you were, for the first time in 70 years, keep in mind, able to overpower your handler. Don't react, he thinks, his inner voice sounding strangely like T'Challa. They're pushing you. You knew this would happen. Your reaction is what's most important. Stay calm. Yes, he says simply, I was able to overpower him. The man says, looking fake impressed. Well, that was pretty lucky, wasn't it? You just overpowered him. Just like that, something you weren't able to do, even when he and other handlers in the past ordered the Winter Soldier to murder innocent people. The situation was different, Bucky says, firm but not argumentative, expressive but not emotional. Hydra never deployed me. The Winter Soldier was always activated, long before I was allowed to leave their bases. I didn't have a chance to fight back when I was conscious enough to realize what was at stake. They didn't give me one. Displeasure crosses the man's gaunt face. Mr. Barnes, again, if you would be so kind, please enlighten us as to how, exactly, you managed to overpower Mr. Rumlow. The echo of Peter's piercing, agonized scream lingers at the memory. Bucky takes a deep breath, remembering to appear sympathetic, and exhales softly as he says, "It felt like I was only moments away from being put under their control again." His own lawyer nods at him and he continues, "It took everything I had, but I was desperate to escape from him. Not a lie, just an omission of truth. They must not find out about Peter." He clears his throat. Just before he could finish saying the words, I threw myself at him and punched him in the face as hard as I could. How many times? Bucky tries very hard not to glance over at the jurors. I wasn't counting. When the lawyer narrows his eyes at him, he adds, I knew that if I gave him another chance to speak, he would finish using their trigger words on me. I didn't want to be violent, but there wasn't any other feasible option. I punched him several times until he was knocked unconscious, and it was safe to stop. But if it weren't for Peter, Bucky knows that's not what would have happened. He would have beaten Rumlow to death like a dog, and this entire trial would be going very differently. You didn't want to be violent, the lawyer repeats slowly, as though highlighting the obvious lie in Bucky's speech. Yet when Brock Rumlow's unconscious body was found dumped in a parking lot, he was, according to the ER doctor who treated him, perilously close to death. He eyes Bucky critically, a haughty tone in his voice. Mr. Barnes, even in your extremely abnormal circumstances, there is a limit to self-defense. I have to wonder, as I'm sure so many of us are, do you know where that is? I do, Bucky says. He meets the man's eyes, careful to school his features. This isn't a fight, his expression says. It's not me versus you. We're all friends here, getting to the bottom of this together. Just one big team all on the same side. At least he hopes that's what his face says. It's entirely possible he isn't nearly as good at this shit as he thinks he is, and his true feelings are on display for everyone to see. I'm not taking your fucking bait, dickhead. Rumlow survived because I didn't want to kill him. Once he was unconscious, I took him to the nearest hospital and left him propped up against an ambulance where I knew paramedics would find and help him. I even waited on a nearby rooftop to make sure he was found. I didn't cause him more harm than I absolutely had to, for my son's sake, even after everything he and his organization did to me. Just a little, he lets the truth out, just a little, just the smallest crack of emotion in his voice, the barest hint of his true feelings. I hate the violent things I was forced to do under their mind control. More times than I can count. Since the day I escaped from them in DC, I've thought to myself that, if it could have prevented all this bloodshed, then I wish I really had died when I fell off that train like the world thought I did. He can't meet Steve's eyes after he says it. The lawyer, on the other hand, looks absolutely pissed. Bucky lets a small, sad smile cover his face. Thanks for the smoking gun, pal. Despite what Rumlow did to me, I didn't want to hurt him. Despite the trauma of what Hydra forced me to do, I don't want to hurt myself either. I want nothing to do with violence. This courtroom is as close as I want to come to another fight for as long as I live. From his seat, T'Challa gives him a victorious smile. This trial is as good as over, that smile says. On the second day of the trial, all 6 of Bucky's psychoanalysts are called to the stand, including his primary doctor from Wakanda, flown in to present her official assessment of him. It doesn't differ too greatly from the other doctors, even though they each were called in from a different corner of the globe. In her very professional opinion, Bucky Barnes is a gentle, compassionate man who's made remarkable steps in his mental health recovery and is, most importantly, not a danger to himself or others. The prosecution's lawyer looked like someone pissed in his cereal when she told him as much. In the end, after all their planning, all the work his defense lawyers put into building his case, all the efforts Bucky made to make sure he could charm the jury, it'll be his doctor and her blunt, straight-to-the-point manner of speaking that wins him his trial. The prosecution questions her, attempting to back her into a corner where she'll be forced to admit that Bucky is capable of great harm, a smirk on the blonde lawyer's face as he asks, "Aren't these symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder that you've outlined in your assessment just one more reason to believe that Mr. Barnes could be susceptible, if not guaranteed, to developing additional mental health issues that would make him an unpredictable threat to himself or others?" His doctor, as straight-faced as Bucky's ever seen anyone look, stares the smarmy lawyer down and says, "If we threw people in jail on the basis that they might, potentially, someday commit a crime, you would have a lot more peers behind bars, Mr. Landman." Landman, right, that's the slimy bastard's name. Landman's face turns red as a bruised plum. These are extenuating circumstances, the Avengers. "Mr. Barnes is not an Avenger," she says. "He's an American citizen who became a prisoner of war. To deny him his right to be free now would be letting the terrorist organization known as Hydra claim one more innocent life." The lawyer seethes. He may not be an Avenger yet, but his power, his abilities. Thousands of children are born with the mutant X gene in this country every year. Her clipped tone stops him short, some with abilities far greater than Bucky Barnes. They are not arrested the moment those abilities manifest, even though they have the potential to be dangerous. That is something we all possess, Mr. Landman. The law exists to prevent the very prosecution of the innocent that you and your associates are currently trying to ensure. It does not permit us to punish someone who has not yet committed a crime. Bucky isn't sure what he said or did to have this woman in his corner, but he loves her. Landman probably doesn't, but Bucky can live with that. The first day in court was an unexpected success. The second day was an absolute breeze. The third day is when the other shoe finally drops. Bucky had tried, really, not to let the hope go to his head. He had done his best not to get carried away thanks to their numerous micro-victories, knowing that the fight isn't over till it's over. But it had been hard, the hope was infectious, and they were all feeling it. After their second day in court, T'Challa had grinned and clapped him on the shoulder so hard that he almost gave Bucky a welt in his excitement. Steve had hugged him like he was trying to make him cough up all his organs, and was too happy to care when Bucky gasped out that he couldn't breathe. His representation, most of whom Bucky believed were very serious, straight-laced individuals, actually mentioned going out for a drink to celebrate their inevitable victory. Bucky had let himself think this trial was practically already over. But on their third day in court, Landman stands from his seat and says, "The prosecution would like to call Tony Stark to the stand." Bucky's head snaps up. Tony, here, they haven't seen or spoken to each other since the day Bucky left for Wakanda, and though Bucky had wanted to, he couldn't ask Steve or T'Challa how the man was for all the same reasons he couldn't ask about Peter. The last he'd heard of him was when T'Challa first woke him up and told him Tony had his hands full finalizing the amendment to the Accords. After that, the chance to ask about his friend hadn't presented itself. He swivels in his seat and watches Tony approach the stand, immediately struck by two things: the shocked looks on T'Challa and Steve's faces, and the hateful look on Tony's. Bucky stares after him, confused. Tony's face is dark, unlike anything Bucky has ever seen. Even when they first met, and Tony had misbelieved that Bucky was a dangerous terrorist manipulating an innocent child for his own gain, he had never looked at him like that. He can't keep the questioning look off his face as Tony takes his seat across from him and stares him down, trying desperately to figure out what's wrong. And what the hell the prosecution is planning. "Mr. Stark," Landman says, his smile beaming, "thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us today. I assure you this won't take long." Tony pins him with a flat look. No retort, no witty remark or condescending joke. "Tony, what the hell? What happened to you?" "Mr. Stark, can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" Tony's cold eyes skim from Steve to Bucky. "I don't have one." Something in Bucky's gut twists. "But you recognize him. Are you aware who he is?" Trial of the century, broadcasted on every news outlet at every hour of the day. "Yeah, I'd say I'm familiar." Thank God, Bucky thinks it's still him. Something's wrong, but at least it's still Tony. "I'm curious, Mr. Stark, if I asked him the same question, do you think he would know the answer?" "What the hell is he playing at?" "You've said my name at least once in every question you've asked, so I'm gonna say yes." "But do you think he would recognize you? Do you think he would know who you are in your position?" "He's sitting right there, Socrates, why don't you ask him?" "So you don't, am I right in assuming that? You don't believe Mr. Barnes would recognize you?" Tony's glare deepens, his voice is tight, "Probably not." The lawyer's smile is sharp enough to cut stone. "How about your father?" In the stand, Tony's whole body goes very still. Bucky's mind races. "Mr. Stark, do you believe the defendant would recognize your father if he saw his face?" The courtroom is completely silent, but all Bucky can hear is the rush of blood in his ears. What the hell is going on? "Mr. Stark." "Yes," Tony says. "Yes, you think he would recognize your father if he saw him." Tony's expression is so dark right now, Bucky doesn't even recognize him. But Tony again says, "Yes." Landman grins, wide and wolfish. "I think it would be beneficial to find out for sure." Tony's hard expression changes into panic. The man turns and motions to one of his associates off to the side, who wheels a large, silver projector into the center of the room. Bucky's head feels like it's spinning. He has no idea what the hell is going on as the projector turns on, displaying a wide, holographic screen. "Play the video," plays. He stares at Tony, but the man doesn't turn his gaze from the screen. He looks like he's about to start hyperventilating at any moment. What the fuck is happening? Bucky thinks, desperately, turning in his seat to silently beg Steve for help, but Steve looks as panicked as Tony does. Panicked, angry, and completely fucking helpless. The screen lights up, big enough for the whole room to see. An old, grainy, unfamiliar video begins to play. But the date in the corner. It's... Zemo's voice suddenly rings in his head, a buried thought, a memory that had been blotted out by his all-consuming grief. "Now, soldier. Mission report. December 16, 1991. Bucky lurches violently in his seat. It all comes back in an instant. Tony, he looks up at him, at his friend, who still looks moments away from passing out, and feels his heart rip in two. "Oh God, no, Tony, no, 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 please." Landman turns back, meets his gaze. And smiles. And then Bucky knows. He knows this isn't a ploy to win the trial. He knows the prosecution is already well aware they're going to lose, that Bucky and his doctors and T'Challa's lawyers have all made their point too well. He knows. He sees that now. This isn't about winning the trial. It's about making it hurt. He can't look away from the scene unfolding before him. That dark, snowy road. The memory stitches itself together with every passing second that the video plays. The crash, Bucky, the Winter Soldier, pulling up beside the car. Tony's mother screaming for help. "God no, Tony, please, Tony." His whole body shakes. Tony folds in on himself as he watches his parents die, as he watches Bucky, a man he stuck his neck out to help save, murder his mother and father. The video isn't long, and it ends with the soldier's impassive, untroubled face staring up at the camera, before attempting to destroy the evidence. When it's over for a moment, no one in the entire room moves or makes a sound. Bucky doesn't think he could even if he wanted to. He killed Howard Stark, Steve's friend. He orphaned Tony. No, 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 God please no. He almost collapses in on himself. But a firm, steady hand reaches out and grabs his wrist beneath the table. Bucky jolts at the touch, but his lawyer doesn't remove his hand until he's taken a deep breath and forced his body to go loose. He can't break down in front of the jury, he can't. But for a moment, the consequences of that don't matter, because a vicious, insidious thought clouds his mind. Will it matter now if he wins? Will it make one fucking bit of difference if they set him free? Will Tony return his son to him now? The realization dawns, that hateful look on Tony's face when they saw each other. He knew before the lawyer called his name. He knew Bucky killed his parents, and he learned that fact while Bucky was out of the picture, while caring for the son of the man who took everything from him. He had Peter with him. Calm down, he thinks frantically. You're not thinking. He wouldn't hurt Peter. You know he wouldn't hurt Peter. No matter how much he despises you, he would never do that. But would he keep him? Would he separate them now, out of spite, or to keep Peter safe from a man he can now never trust? Mr. Stark, the lawyer says, voice coated with false concern, I only have one more question for you today. It takes him a moment, but Tony manages to lift his head. He doesn't look at Bucky, but he doesn't need to. The expression on his face says more than enough. Tony looks like he wants nothing more than to see Bucky dead. Depending on what Landman asks next, Bucky realizes with slow, mounting horror, Tony may just get his chance. Given the horrible scene we have all just witnessed, Landman says, wouldn't you agree, Mr. Stark, that this man is not only dangerous on a completely unprecedented level, but that, for the good of all of us including himself, it is imperative that he be sentenced to the strictest security measures authorized by the court of law? Bucky doesn't dare to breathe. Tony's cold gaze shifts over to him. This is it, the chance for Tony to take his revenge. All he has to do is say yes. Yes, Bucky Barnes is a menace, a threat to everyone he meets. He should be locked away in the thickest cell we have. That's all it would take. One small word and Bucky knows the jury would follow him, the way the Avengers have followed him, the way Peter has followed him. Tony Stark is just that kind of person. And right now, he has the power to ensure Bucky never sees his son again. It would be worse than death, but Tony knows that. And judging by the look on his face, he isn't opposed to the thought at all. Bucky waits, frozen all the way to his core, for Tony to seal his fate. But the man opens his mouth and says, absolutely not. Bucky flinches, Landman, clearly confused, sputters and says, forgive me, Mr. Stark, could you repeat that? Tony rounds on him with a glare. I said absolutely not. You don't think this man, the defendant, deserves to be incarcerated for the crime we all just witnessed, as violent and horrible as it was? I think the jury already decided that Bucky Barnes is not legally responsible for the Winter Soldier's crimes, Tony snaps. And according to every single medical professional who's examined him, there's no evidence to suggest he's going to randomly snap and go on a bloody rampage any more than the rest of us are. You don't have a leg to stand on. He stands, glaring Landman down as he descends from the bench and heads for the doors. Landman stays frozen solid for a moment, until what just happened catches up with him, and he runs an aggravated hand through his reedy blonde hair and announces, belatedly, no further questions. On his 5th day in court, 3 weeks after he was extradited to the US, Bucky Barnes is fully exonerated by the elected jury of the United Nations. Steve is there, as he has been for every single court proceeding, and the moment Bucky's wrist is uncuffed, he finds himself swept up in a tight, emotional, desperate hug. One-armed and exhausted, Bucky clings back for everything he's worth. He can't keep the smile off his face despite how bone-tired he is. He did it. He's kept his promise. He's free of Hydra, and as of today, he no longer needs to run or hide. He reached the mountaintop. Thank God, Steve is whispering into his shoulder. Somehow, Bucky knows he's crying without seeing it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank fucking God. Easy, Rogers, Bucky jokes, but his heart's not in it. If we should thank anyone, it's definitely T'Challa. You're very welcome, Bucky. Bucky turns, Steve still mostly clinging to him, to greet his friend and savior. T'Challa grins at him, unabashedly, openly relieved, and holds out a long, silver case for him to take. "I believe this is yours," he says, "to celebrate your victory." "I couldn't have done it without you," Bucky says, but he obediently reaches over and pops the case open. His eyes get a little misty at the sight of an arm, a left arm, black and gold, and definitely something designed by Shuri, and more importantly, sitting next to it with an expectant look on its face, Orby. "Hey, buddy." Orby beeps at him indignantly, and Bucky can't help but laugh. He picks the robot up and hands him to Steve before closing and accepting the silver case. "I can't thank you enough for all you've done for me, T'Challa." "There is one way you can thank me," the king says. "Name it." "Go home," T'Challa says, a soft smile on his face. "Go home to your son and tell him that you love him." His heart feels like it's in his throat when he wraps the man in a one-armed hug and says his goodbyes. None of this would have been possible without him. As long as Bucky lives, he will never be able to repay what T'Challa, Shuri, and the rest of Wakanda has done for him, and for his family. The family he needs to go home to. When T'Challa and his team are out of sight, Bucky turns back to Steve. "Peter is waiting," Steve says, grinning. "He wanted to come, but just in case I put the brakes on that, he's waiting for us." "Where?" Bucky can't help but ask. Did Tony? Grief melts into Steve's tired, relieved expression. "Tony let us stay at the tower these last few months," he says. "He mostly hasn't. I think he was staying elsewhere. But he always came back if I had somewhere else I needed to be. He was there for Peter whenever I was, just never at the same time." Bucky blinks. "You knew," he realizes. He's never seen Steve look so guilty. "I found notes about it when I was raiding Hydra bases, trying to find you," he says. "I never told Tony." "Steve. And you didn't remember?" he asks hesitantly. "You didn't know?" Bucky shakes his head. "I remember a lot of things, but that sure as hell wasn't one of them." "I'm sorry, Buck." "Just tell me one thing," Bucky pleads. Was he there when Tony found out? Did he have to deal with that? I need to know." Steve grimaces, tucking Orby against his chest. "Tony's known for months," he says. "T'Challa told him before you left for Wakanda." "T'Challa?" "The day Tony blew a hole in his own roof and flew away." "Fuck." "Yeah," Steve says. "I have a feeling that day would have gone very differently if Peter hadn't been with us." Bucky's heart sinks. He'd smiled at Tony and made him promise to look after his kid, moments before the man found out Bucky had killed his parents. And he still took care of Peter while he was gone. And then, essentially, told the UN's lawyer to go fuck himself. God. He's in the middle of trying to figure out how he can possibly apologize and thank Tony enough for it to mean anything when they step outside of the courthouse doors and catch sight of the man himself getting into the backseat of a car. "Tony," Bucky calls, taking the courthouse steps 3 at a time. "Tony." The man's head snaps up at the sound of his voice, pausing, 1 foot inside the car. He watches Bucky approach, his expression half obscured by a pair of dark sunglasses. Bucky comes to a stop and realizes he has no idea what the fuck to say. "Tony," he tries, I'm so fucking sorry. I'm so fucking grateful." Tony stares at him wordlessly, his jaw tightening when Steve comes to a stop next to Bucky. After a moment, he takes a deep breath and says, "Peter is waiting for you at the tower." Bucky's face breaks into a relieved grin. I don't want to see you there when I get back." His voice is cold. It's not a request. His head tilts in Steve's direction. "Either of you." "Tony," Bucky says, pleading, but the man finishes climbing into his car and slams the door. Steve places his hand on the small of his back as they watch him drive away. It's odd how painful the loss is. Bucky's gained his freedom, his right to be a citizen of his home country again. He's moments away from reuniting with his child. But he's lost a good friend. The ache gnaws. "Come on," Steve says, leading him down the sidewalk. "Our ride will be here soon." With a deep breath, Bucky nods, forcing the conflicted feelings as far down as they can go. There's still so much to celebrate, to be grateful for, to look forward to. "I'm ready," he says. "I just want to see my son." Chapter 24, This Family I Have Found. Objectively, he knows that Avengers Tower is an incredible feat of modern architecture, but Bucky hardly pays the structure any attention as he and Steve step out of the elevator and onto the man's private floor. His heart is in his throat, but for the first time in months, it's not a bad thing. "Peter," Steve calls out, breaking Bucky out of his thoughts. "Peanut, we're back." They turn the corner where the kitchen and living room slot together, and across the L-shaped sofa, through a window that takes up the entire wall, Bucky sees him. There's a balcony outside the window that faces Central Park. Peter is there, leaning over the railing, playing on a cell phone. His head whips up when they turn the corner, and Bucky watches the surprise and disbelief and joy and relief all cross his face at once, mouth popping open, his wide eyes shining with tears. He trips over himself, bolting for the balcony door, not taking his eyes off Bucky, and promptly smacks face first into the clear glass beside the opening. Bucky winces at the loud slap the impact makes, jogging around the sofa to meet the kid halfway. "Jesus, Pete, that looked like it hurt. Are you okay? Oof." He doesn't get to finish. "Dad," Peter whimpers, suddenly latched onto him, arms tight around Bucky's neck. Bucky is quick to hold the boy around the middle to keep him up, hold him steady off the ground, when he realizes something startling. Peter's feet are touching the floor. He jerks and pulls the boy back far enough to peer down and confirm his suspicions. Holy shit. The boy's still short for his age, but he's grown. He's grown so much, he has to be at least almost as tall as Tony now too, maybe even 3 inches taller than he was 4 months ago. "Peter, look at you." Peter grins at him, he's fuller too. His shoulders aren't so narrow, not as bird-boned as he was the last time Bucky saw him, and his face. Bucky's eyes mist over as they search the kid's face, so intimately familiar and in some ways entirely new. It's Peter's face, but he's growing into his jawline, the shape of his brow. His complexion is healthier, revealing a splattering of freckles across his cheeks and the bridge of his nose that Bucky never noticed before. He has the same sunshine grin stretched across his handsome face, but the baby fat has melted from his cheeks, the dimple beside his lips more pronounced than it ever was. His eyes are the only thing about him that are the same, big and dark and brimmed with happy tears. Bucky cups his face and stares into them. He can't believe how much closer Peter is now, tall enough to smack his forehead against Bucky's shoulder when he pulls him back in for a hug. "I can't believe how much you've grown." Peter laughs and hugs him tight. "Welcome home, Dad." Bucky can't help squeezing and rocking him a little side to side. His baby boy, he never has to miss another moment of his son's life for as long as he lives. Despite the rush of emotions overwhelming him, the relief of that thought reigns supreme. "I'm home, kiddo," he says, resting his temple to the crown of Peter's head. "For good." Bucky roams through the tower floor while Steve and Peter pack. It's too much space for the two of them, would be too much for all three of them, even if Tony had allowed them to stay. Steve assures him their new place is a lot less daunting, and he'd be lying if he said he isn't anxious to see it. Part of it is that he's anxious to obey Tony's wishes and make himself scarce, and part of it is that he's deeply curious what Steve's idea of the perfect home for us, as he put it, looks like. The rest of him is just eager to be with his family in a place they can call their own. The floor Steve and Peter have stayed in for these last few months is beautiful and spacious, and nicer than anything they could ever afford on their own, but it's not home. Not that Steve and Peter haven't, clearly, done their best to make it feel like it. Bucky can't help touring the place like it's the world's most comforting museum, as Peter and Steve move from room to room, sorting things into boxes and suitcases. Little things to stand out to him, flooding his whole body with warmth. The wooden bird feeders Steve and Peter made together at Tony's Lake Mansion hanging out on the balcony. An easel in the living room, a canvas sitting atop it, displaying a half-finished painting of Central Park at sunset. Beside it, a cluttered desk, covered in technological bits and bobs that remind Bucky of their tiny island counter in their old shithole apartment. How messy it would get whenever Peter worked on his web shooters. Clothes and books and fragments of Peter's homework are scattered across most surfaces. Bucky's eyes get misty when he realizes Peter's already in his junior year. How quickly things can change. He smiles, thinking back to Peter's freshman year graduation, how proud he had been that day, how much Peter has grown in every way since then. But by far, his favorite part of the whole place is the fridge. He's sure it's well stocked with whatever ultra, nutrient-rich fertilizer Peter's clearly been fed since Bucky left, but that's not why he loves it. It's the outside that he can't get enough of. It tells the whole story, everything he's missed, all the little things that have happened in his absence. The most obvious example is the photos, no doubt taken with the camera Steve bought for Peter back in Montana. There has to be at least a dozen of them. Steve standing at the stove, pensively staring down at a pot, black smoke wafting in his face, an apron that looks child-sized stretching ridiculously across his massive chest. Tony in his workshop, hands blurred mid-gesture, his mouth open and face bright like he's in the middle of a passionate speech. Peter lounging on the sofa, a goofy, candid grin across his face, the photo clearly taken the moment he noticed the camera. Peter slouched over the dining table with an incredible case of bedhead. Peter and Ned playing video games on the floor, staring up at the TV with happy smiles. Steve passed out in a reclining chair, an open book draped across his face. Peter looking sheepish and a little sad outside of Midtown Tech, both hands gripping his backpack straps, his gaze averted. His first day of school, Bucky realizes. It couldn't have been taken more than a couple of weeks ago. And in the middle of them, like a centerpiece, the photo of Peter and Bucky that Sharon had taken of them back at Frank's. Bucky's cap pulled low over his face, hands shoved in the engine of a car, Peter leaning against the bumper, gazing up at him, affection beaming in his big, dark eyes. Bucky's surprised to see it, after telling Peter he could only keep it if he hid it away. It looks pristine, well cared for. It makes his chest ache when he sees it. The first photo of the two of them ever taken. He hopes that soon, Peter will have many more to add to his collection. The photos aren't the only things on display. There are trinkets, little hints of Peter and Steve's life together that soothe the ache resonating in his chest. A little note messily scribbled on a torn piece of notebook paper, Peter's boyish writing scrawling out, "Hey Pops, went to the movies with Ned and MJ, be home by 10. Love you." Bucky stares at it, his heart full. He wonders who MJ is and when Peter started calling Steve Pops. Maybe it was around the same time Steve started calling him Peanut. Part of Bucky is sad he missed it. The rest of him is just relieved to feel so much love between the two of them. There are birthday cards pinned up too. He doesn't feel ashamed about reading them, they are on display after all. Peter's birthday card to Steve is sincere and sweet and full of gratitude, his message short and to the point. "Happy birthday, Steve. I never know what to write in these things, but I love you and I'm grateful for all you do. To prove it, I promise to let you win one next time we play Mario Kart. It's a big sacrifice, but you deserve it. Love, Peter." Bucky chuckles, despite having zero earthly idea what the hell Mario Kart is. He puts the card back and picks up the next one, a birthday card for Peter, but this one is from Tony. It doesn't surprise him that the card is more humorous than heartfelt, but in some ways it does. Tony choosing to make a joke instead of be brutally honest about his feelings seems right up his alley, and yet, if ever there was a valid excuse to let his walls down a bit and shamelessly admit that he cares, it feels like this would have been it. The card reads, "I survived another year and all I got was this lousy card," written above a drawing of a worn-down, ragged-looking cartoon bird. It's too mature for a kid's 16th birthday, but the message Tony wrote makes up for it. "Happy birthday, kid. Try not to get too hopped up on birthday cake tonight. The last thing you need is more sugar. I've got Star Trek, The Next Generation queued up and a box of those mini sausage rolls with your name on it whenever you're ready. You know where I'll be. T.S." How like Tony to go out of his way to make a card for someone and then not hand it to them in person. At least, Bucky's assuming it wasn't handed to Peter in person. The way it's written makes him think it was left out, in plain sight, placed somewhere Peter stumbled upon it as if it appeared out of nowhere. And still he can feel the man's concern when he reads between the lines. It comforts him to know that Tony was still there for Peter, that learning about what Bucky had done, and that Steve hid it from him, didn't stop him from keeping his promise and being there when Peter needed him. He knows the boy would have been fine if it had only been him and Steve, but Peter adores Tony, and Bucky's grateful that he didn't have to say goodbye to two people he loves at the exact same time, both of them Bucky's doing. He puts the card back and eyes the last one, already suspecting what it will say, but opening it anyway. Steve's birthday card to Peter. It's handmade, a little white card with a watercolor painting of Peter sitting in a windowsill, bathed in the orange light of sunset, face turned away to stare out the tower window. The caption at the bottom is written in thick black ink, Steve's neat penmanship a stark contrast to Peter. Peter, Avengers Tower, July 23, 2017. Bucky traces the beautiful piece of art with his metal hand before flipping the card open. Inside it reads, "Peter, you were an unexpected addition to our lives, but now that you're here we could never imagine life without you. We're grateful that you were brought into this world, and that we were lucky enough to become your parents. You have made both of us happier than you will ever know. Happy birthday. Love, Dad and Pops." Bucky's breath catches in his throat. He reads it twice again, then a fourth time. His eyes glaze over with tears. Fucking Steve. Of course he would sign a card from both of them, knowing Bucky would want him to without ever needing to ask. He gently pins the card back to its spot on the refrigerator door and takes one last look at the whole picture. The magnets pinning everything to the door are letters of the alphabet, and he realizes when he takes a step back that they all spell out different things. POPS holds up the photo of Steve at the stove, ZZZ on the one of him sleeping in the recliner, CUT on the photo of Peter's outrageous bed head, BFF on the photo of Peter and Ned. DAD and ME on the photo of Bucky and Peter at Frank's dealership. And on the birthday cards underneath, spread out to hold up each card, the magnets spell out I love you. He hears the gentle pitter-patter of bare feet on the smooth, engineered floor before two scrawny arms wrap around his chest. Bucky smiles and holds his son's arms. You finish packing? No, Peter says, just wanted to hug you. The boy nuzzles his face into Bucky's back. The moment hits him a little too abruptly. He really did it. He made it home to his family. He's okay and Peter's okay and Steve's okay and they're here together, reunited at last. It feels unreal. He turns in Peter's arms so he can wrap him up in a proper hug, needing to ground himself, briefly overwhelmed. He's here, he reassures himself, squeezing the boy tighter. He's real, it's real. He's here, I'm home. I missed you, Peter says, muffled, his face smooshed against Bucky's collarbones. I missed you too. Bucky rests his head on top of his son's, eyes slipping closed. You brought me home, kiddo, he says, confessing it like he's asking for forgiveness. Thoughts of you kept me going. You'll probably never know how much. But every time I started to doubt myself, I knew you were here, waiting, thinking of me. He pulls away slightly, smooths some of the unruly hair from the boy's face. Peter looks up at him and smiles. He doesn't deserve it, but he finds the forgiveness he was hoping for when he looks into those eyes. I was always thinking of you, Dad, Peter says, not realizing that Bucky fully understands the weight of those words now. The significance of them. The most important thing in the entire world to Peter and Bucky both. That thing that made them a family. The fact that there was one person, one single person in this wide, crowded world who was thinking of them. He knows he doesn't need to, but he says it anyway. I'm sorry I had to leave, Peter. He gently squeezes the boy's shoulders, comforting, apologetic. I know I never said it, but the words catch in his throat. He laughs, breathless, surprised when tears start running down his cheeks, hot enough to scald his skin. I'm so glad you followed me home that night. Peter's eyes brim with tears, like a biological reaction to his own. Bucky gently runs the knuckle of his forefinger across the boy's cheek to catch the first few tears as they begin to fall. He wipes his own face with the back of his metal hand, smiling in spite of the mess he's making. I thought of you too, he says, when he's sure his voice won't crumble the moment he opens his mouth. And I always have. You were in my heart from the moment we met, Peter. I was scared to get close to you because I think I knew, even back then, how much I would end up loving you, how badly I needed you. He wonders if Peter knew it too, deep down. If that gut feeling that told him Bucky was good and safe also told him how much Peter could help him, how important it is to have someone in your life that you would fight for, even when all the odds seem stacked against you. How each of us needs someone, even if it's only a single person, to hold on to care for us and to take care of, to think of us, to keep us from being alone. He wonders if the subconscious part of Peter that knew he needed Bucky knew that Bucky needed him too, even when Bucky himself didn't. Bucky clears his throat with a soft laugh and says, You told me once that I was your hero for saving you that night. He remembers how viscerally he had wanted to deny it, back then, how deeply it cut to think a child as good and pure as Peter saw him as anything other than a monster. The guilt of feeling like he had pulled the wool over the boy's eyes without ever meaning to, almost as fierce as his determination to never let anyone harm this person who meant the world to him. His smile widens, his hand gently cupping the boy's head. But from day one, Peter, even when I didn't know it, you were always the one who was saving me. He presses their foreheads together, lets the tears fall freely. Thank you for finding me. Peter inhales a watery breath, rolls their foreheads together. His hands are still so small when they wrap around Bucky's wrists. It stuns him how hands that small can manage to hold up Bucky's entire world. You're still my hero, Dad, he says, his voice soft but his tone firm like he needs Bucky to believe it. Regardless of who saved who, you were kind enough to need me. He pulls away, smiling up at him like Bucky hung the stars in the sky. I'm really glad you and Steve became my dads. We love you so much, Peter, Steve says suddenly, both of them turning to follow the sound of his voice. He smiles at them from the other side of the kitchen, leaning against the wall like he's been watching them for some time. I know I can speak for both of us when I tell you, you are easily the best thing the 21st century has produced so far. Peter laughs, moving to grab some tissues to wipe his face. Bucky settles for the sleeve of his jacket, wiping his cheeks dry, and then noticing Peter waiting, smiling up at him softly. Come on, kiddo, he says, arm wrapping around the boy's shoulders. Let's finish packing so we can all finally go home. Bucky would never admit that he had doubts, but he's glad to be proven wrong when he sees their new apartment. Steve chose well. It's nowhere near as egregiously large as their private floor at the Avengers Tower, but it's the perfect size for them. A 2-story brownstone in Brooklyn, only a few blocks away from where Brooklyn ends and Queens begins. The neighborhood is quiet, well, as quiet as it gets in New York, anyway, certainly much quieter than their shithole apartment had been, the old rickety building placed smack dab on a major road. Their new apartment is modestly sized, 2 bedrooms plus a den that Bucky immediately knows Steve is hopping to turn into a painting studio. There's already furniture loaded into all the main rooms, not much, but all the necessary things. Beds, a dining table and chairs, a sofa. It's bare bones, but Bucky's grateful for that in some ways. It means they can truly make it theirs together, the 3 of them. "How did you set this all up?" Bucky asks Steve, following the man inside with another load of boxes. They don't have much, but he's still surprised by how many boxes and bags they end up hauling from the tower. Steve huffs as he sets one of the larger boxes down. "It's been in the works for several weeks now. I never intended for us to stay at the tower permanently, especially since tensions were high. Thankfully, this revamped Accords deal includes a decent pension, and you'd be surprised what kind of discounts people are willing to hand out to Captain America." "You're a national treasure, Steve." Bucky laughs at the flat look the other man gives him. "I had the furniture ordered a few days ago," Steve says, ignoring his comment. "I was thinking that, even if things didn't go well, Peter and I would still need somewhere to stay. That's why I didn't exactly go crazy with the shopping catalog." "I'm glad you didn't," Bucky tells him, moving out of the way to let Peter inside, carrying way too many bags at once. "Kid, I told you not to overdo it." "I can literally lift a bus, Dad." "That's not what I'm worried about. Your arms are so full you can't even see where you're going. You're just asking to fall down these stairs and break your neck. Pace yourself a little, the boxes aren't going anywhere." "I'm not going to fall," Peter shouts, already out the door to grab more bags from the rented truck. "Tell that to the face print you made on Tony's window back at the tower," Bucky calls back, grinning when he hears Peter mutter grumpily to himself in response. He sets his own armful of boxes down and then notices Steve hasn't moved. He looks up, their eyes meeting where Steve is lounging against the kitchen counter, watching him, a warm smile etched onto his face. "Like something you see, Rogers." "I do," he says, his voice is soft, fond. "I like him a lot, in fact." "When did you get to be such a charmer? I distinctly remember that Steve Rogers was an awkward little nerd who couldn't flirt with someone to save his life." Steve shrugs, grinning. "Only because my heart was never in it. Seems to come much easier to me when it's you, Buck." "I'm flattered." "I'm just glad you're here," Steve confesses. "I hoped you would be, of course. I planned for it, but knowing there was a chance you wouldn't be, it made it pretty hard to enjoy any of this. Now you're here and I'm so deliriously happy, I don't even know where to start." "How about the kitchen?" Bucky suggests, grinning at the surly look Steve gives him. "Come on, Stevie. Soon it'll sink in that you're truly stuck with me forever and then you can mope and be sappy all you want. Let's finish unloading the truck so I can put our son to bed and fight you for the good side of the mattress." Laughing, Steve shakes his head but obeys, following Bucky out the front door of their new home. It takes a few weeks, but after days and days of arranging, rearranging and rearranging, Bucky can finally say they've made their new home truly theirs. It's cozy, warm. There isn't a single piece of busted, duct-taped dumpster furniture in the whole apartment, though Bucky did take advantage of some nearby thrift stores, garage sales and pawn shops to find homey, second-hand things to dress the place up a little. There's a floorboard in the kitchen that creaks when he walks on it and their front door squeaks a bit too loudly when it opens, but those are minor things, easy fixes. The plumbing and appliances work and the walls are well insulated, not drafty or rotting on the inside. For the first couple of weeks, he and Peter spend most weekends touring the markets, finding little things to fill their new home with, odds and ends that catch their attention. Steve, ever the artist, always comes up with some attractive way to incorporate them into the interior design, even when he shakes his head at their questionable choices. "Why would you buy this?" he asks, dumbstruck, turning over the small, bright gold lamp with its glass, jade-colored lampshade in his hands. "It looks older than we are, Buck." Bucky shrugs. "Peter said it looked lonely on the shelf," is all he says. Steve makes a face, earning a wide, devilish grin on Bucky's. "Well, it can be his desk lamp then," he says, sorting it into the Peter pile of their Sunday haul. It becomes a routine, until there isn't a square inch in their new apartment that the 3 of them haven't personalized. Steve made the wise choice of using plants to break up the warm, earthy tones of most of their furniture with a pop of color, and it ends up with their living room looking quite jungle-like, when all's said and done. It's homey, comforting. Bucky doesn't mind it at all. He's added a few things himself, little things, personal touches that he had been thinking of for months. The first was adding Becca's photo to the new collage they made on their fridge. In some ways it had hurt to tell Peter about her, though he knows the boy would never blame him for what happened. She looked like you, the boy says, running his fingers along the edge of her photograph. She had your smile. The more I remember about her, the more reminded I am of you, Bucky confesses. Beside him, Steve wraps his arm around Bucky's waist and presses him in close, a tight side hug. She was a troublemaker at times, but she was always such a good kid. Smart, kind, you would have really liked her. A small smile crosses the boy's face. Yeah, I bet I would have. She was always so protective of you, Steve says. His hand tightens on Bucky's hip. It was always so funny to see. You were already so tall and filled out when we were teens, and she was this little slip of a thing, shorter than even me. It didn't matter. If someone messed with you, usually because they were messing with me and you stepped in, she'd act like she was 10 feet tall. Kid wasn't scared of anything. She used to get so mad at us when we came home all beat up, Bucky says, chuckling. She had everybody fooled with that sweet little girl act. Guys in the army couldn't cuss someone out as well as my baby sister could. I wonder where she learned it from, Steve deadpans. Bucky only smiles wider. Becca's photo looks at home on their fridge. Steve hangs a photo of his mother too, and in the center Peter hangs a selfie of the three of them, taken on their first night in their new apartment, sitting on the sofa in their empty living room, surrounded by boxes, side by side and stuffing their face with pizza. Peter had whipped out his camera and taken the shot without a word, catching Bucky mid-bite of a slice of pizza. Steve half-turned to face him, a soft smile on his face. Peter's grinning up at the camera, bright and a little mischievous. It's a good photo. The magnets holding it up spell out Family, and it makes Bucky's throat feel tight every time he sees it. In the living room, they dedicate the wall beside the TV for the rest of the family photos, hung in a mixture of mismatched frames. Peter hangs a photo of his mother and father, and one of him when he was younger with his aunt and uncle when he was so little. Bucky's heart aches to look at him. Steve hangs a photo of the two of them from their army days, grinning like fools, Bucky beaming at Steve like the lovesick idiot he is. Bucky hangs a copy of the photo of him and his family that used to hang above their fireplace in his childhood home. The rest of the space is dedicated to new photos of the three of them. It fills up slowly, like the rest of their home. Peter wastes no time in decorating his room to the nines with every geeky pop culture-related thing he can find. It's such a source of pride to see his son at home in his own room, having a space all to himself, his own bed, a place that is truly his. Bucky's wanted to give him this almost since the day they met. Seeing Peter now, happy and comfortable and safe, hanging posters on his walls, stringing lights up above his bed, arranging his books and DVDs just so, a certain organized chaos, it calms Bucky somewhere deep in his psyche. It feels right. His and Steve's room is comfortable and cozy, if a little cramped. The huge bed is worth taking up most of the room for. Steve might not be the most frivolous spender, but he clearly didn't scrimp on this purchase. Bucky lets him take over in the decorating department, and he's glad he did. Steve hangs plants in front of their window, and paintings above and across from the bed, original works in beautiful pastel watercolors. A brass-framed mirror somehow makes the room seem bigger than it is, and the white duvet on their bed and white curtains on the window makes it feel brighter, more filled with light. He even lets Bucky have the good side of the mattress. Bucky loves him with every beat of his heart. Steve was right. In the end, their new home is perfect for them. With their apartment fully moved into, Steve busy with his newfound Avengers responsibilities, and Peter halfway through his first semester of his junior year, Bucky finds himself with more time on his hands than he knows what to do with. He talks to T'Challa and Shuri, now and then, taking advantage of Orby's communication abilities to video chat with the Wakandans from time to time. T'Challa even has his doctor make a referral for him to continue his therapy in New York, which Bucky appreciates. Peter is seeing a doctor too, supposedly started the same week Steve brought him back to New York, and between that, band practice, and the school decathlon, Bucky is eager for ways to fill his day while he waits for Steve and Peter to come home. He starts by shaving the impressive beard he grew while he was overseas, and while he's bent over the sink, staring at his face in the mirror, a thought hits him, almost overpowering in its intensity. He reaches for the pair of scissors in his grooming kit without a second thought. When he steps out of the bathroom, dressed but still damp from his shower, Steve and Peter are making breakfast in the kitchen, making small talk about the busy Monday ahead of them. Peter notices him first and stops dead when he looks up and sees him. Holy shit, Dad. Steve turns around and Bucky watches his reaction carefully. His eyes widen, his mouth falls open in a silent gasp, hands falling away from the frying pan and spatula he'd been holding. "Buck," he breathes out, soft, speechless. Bucky smiles and runs his hand through his freshly cut hair, as short as he used to keep it back in the day. He wonders if he looks like the Bucky Steve remembers most. He's pretty sure he does because Steve swallows thickly, a lump caught in his throat, and stares him down for a moment longer before he groans out, "Peter, go to school." Peter looks between them, eyes wide, then abruptly drops his spoon into his half-finished bowl of cereal, throws his backpack on, and practically books it for the door. "Have a good day at school, kiddo," Bucky calls, the air knocked from his lungs as Steve barrels into him, hands tight in his new, short hair, and pulls him in for an almost violent kiss. "Goodbye," Peter shouts, the door slamming loudly behind him, making Bucky laugh as Steve wrangles him down onto the couch. They somehow make it back to the bed. Half an hour later, Bucky groans and rubs his now smooth cheek against Steve's chest, complaining, "Now I need another shower, you punk." Steve grunts, completely unapologetic. His hand trails up Bucky's spine and gently cards through his short hair. "What made you want to cut it?" Bucky hesitates but isn't sure why. He knows Steve will understand, that the man will have no reason to stop him. "It felt like something I needed to do to move on." His hand gently runs over Steve's bare chest, caressing his skin. "And I wanted to look presentable for my plans today." Steve, as Bucky told himself he would be, was more than supportive of Bucky's plans. He never expected him to join the Avengers, and Bucky's grateful for that. They both know he would help if the situation arose and he was needed, but just the same, if that day never comes, Bucky is more than happy to live, as though there isn't anything special about him at all. He pauses outside the door, forcing himself to take a deep breath. He doesn't know why he's anxious. He's done a lot worse and apologized to a lot more people than this, but he still feels tense with nerves. It takes him a moment to gather himself before he can push the door open. They're both standing there at the front desk. Sharon sees him first. She gasps like she's seen a ghost, elbows her husband sharply in the arm. "Frank, Frank." Frank turns around, meets his gaze. For a moment he looks completely livid. Bucky forces himself to stay put as the man half shouts, "Son of a bitch," and stomps over to him, staring him down, his angry dark eyes boring holes into him. Bucky smiles in spite of himself. "Hi, Frank." "You've got some nerve," the man seethes, practically hissing the words in his fury. "Do you have any idea how damn worried we were?" And then he surges forward and wraps him in a tight hug, the angriest hug Bucky's ever been given, and he laughs to stifle his sob and hugs the man back. "I'm sorry," he says, patting the man firmly on the back. "For all of it. I'm sorry for everything I put you through." "You shut up," Frank barks, pulling back, eyeing his face critically. "You look good," he says after a moment, visibly relieved. "God, you had us worried out of our minds, Jim. We thought the feds got you. And then this trial." He looks sharply back at his wife as she steps closer, waiting for her turn to hug and scold Bucky in kind. "Your boy, what happened to your boy? Is he here? Is he safe?" "Peter's fine," Bucky assures, heartbroken by the happy sob Sharon makes. "He's at school right now. We have an apartment in Brooklyn near McCarran Park. He's taking band in school and he's so tall, Frank, you wouldn't recognize him." "I hardly even recognize you," Frank grunts, tugging on a lock of Bucky's short hair. "Hell, Jim, you worried us sick. I can't tell you how sorry I am." "I don't want to hear it," Frank says, gruff, leaving no room for argument. "We're just glad you and your boy are all right. Fucking hell, Jim." Bucky grins and opens his arms for Sharon to squeeze him tightly in a hug. "We never believed those stories for a minute," she says to him sternly. "We've been waiting for you, Jim, darling. You are home now, aren't you? Now that this whole trial nonsense has been settled, you'll come back, won't you?" "That's actually part of the reason I'm here," Bucky admits. "I was wondering how busy you are, if you still need some help around the shop." Frank and Sharon look at each other, and then the man stares at him, his expression not giving a single thing away. "When can you start?" A routine settles between the three of them that comforts Bucky to his very core. It's domestic, peaceful. They make breakfast together most mornings, except for the ones where Peter has trouble pulling himself out of bed. Steve always takes it upon himself to intervene in those moments. Bucky's caught him more than once, sitting on Peter's bed, blasting terrible oldies music from his phone, smiling as the boy groans and buries his head beneath his pillow. God, he loves them so much, he can hardly stand it. Steve does most of his Avengers business in the afternoons, so Bucky and Peter usually leave together in the mornings. They walk to the station together, just like they used to, talking and making each other laugh until they go their separate ways, to school and work respectively. Bucky usually has the house to himself when he gets home. Sometimes Steve isn't needed at the tower, and they'll steal a quiet moment to themselves before Peter returns from school or his extracurricular activities, taking advantage of the brief window of privacy. Sometimes Peter doesn't come home until late, spending time with his friends or going to the tower to see Tony, though he tries to be home for dinner most nights, at the very least. They implemented a no patrolling until after dinner rule, so unless the boy made plans to eat elsewhere, he at the very least graces them with his presence long enough to eat something before taking off again. Bucky tries not to feel lonely about it. He's glad Peter is getting out a bit more, truly, he is. And it's hard to feel lonesome when Steve seems riveted to his side, as though he's bent on making up for all of their lost time. And really, Bucky knows he's being a tad unreasonable. Peter isn't spending that much time away from home. He's home by the evenings, and unless patrolling runs late for some reason, he's usually up to spending some time with them before bed, curling up on the couch and watching a movie or an episode of a show with them, or sometimes a game, or they'll make hot chocolate or tea and sit and talk about their day. And Peter's home most weekends, especially as the last tendrils of summer give way to fall. On the rainy days, the slow, quiet mornings when there's no school or work or Avengers business to concern themselves with, they'll sit on the couch, Peter lounging against his side, seemingly content to curl up against him and never move. Bucky knows his boy is growing up, and these moments may be fewer and farther between. But God, if he doesn't plan to soak up every second of it that he can get. Those days are by far Bucky's favorite, the slow days when it's just the three of them, happy and at home together, warm and safe where they belong. They're better than anything he ever thought he would deserve. His chest feels like it might crack open trying to contain all the love he feels on days like that. They're nearly perfect. Nearly. It's hard to think of family and not think of Tony, no matter how hard he tries. It's something he's been able to discuss with his doctor in his therapy sessions. The guilt, the desire to make it all right, to tell Tony how utterly, devastatingly sorry he is. His doctor lets him vent, but gently reassures him that some things are just out of our control, no matter how desperately we wish otherwise. He knows he can't make things right between them, despite how badly he wants to. Tony has every right to keep his distance. He still spends time with Peter, still invites him to the tower, though he fully keeps his distance from Steve, and even more so from Bucky. Bucky can tell that Peter is hurt by the rift between them, that he wants things to go back to normal. But whenever Bucky tries to broach the subject, Peter just smiles and shakes his head, tells him it's all right, that he has faith Mr. Stark will forgive him, but if he doesn't, that it's okay. They're still a family and that won't ever change. He's right, Bucky knows he is. If Tony can't ever forgive him, it won't change the fact that Bucky has finally found his home, a family he loves with all of his heart. It hurts to think they can never go back to the way things were, but that's not up to him, and he has to live with that. So he makes his peace with Tony's decision and the man's feelings for him, thanks to Peter's gentle guidance. And then, almost that very same night, there's a brisk knock at the door. Bucky isn't sure who to expect when he opens it. But it sure as hell isn't. Tony. Barnes, Tony says. He's dressed in a suit, hands stuffed in his pockets. His expression is hidden away behind those same dark sunglasses, except for the tightness in his jaw. Bucky gapes at him, speechless and stunned. He doesn't know where to begin. Then the man sighs, removes his sunglasses, folds them and says, "So it turns out, resentment is corrosive and I hate it." Something catches in Bucky's throat. Tony. The man looks at him, their eyes meeting. Bucky wants to apologize, to thank him, to somehow make the other man understand what his friendship meant to him, what an impact he's had on their family. But he's not sure where to start. When he opens his mouth, the only thing that comes out is, "I'm really glad you're here." Tony lifts an eyebrow at him, and the slight quirk of his lips tells Bucky that this isn't the right time to pour his heart out, that that's not why Tony's here, and maybe he just isn't ready to hear it. So Bucky opens the door wider and steps aside. "Coming in, we've got pizza on the way and Empire Strikes Back is about to start." Tony shakes his head at him, but steps inside without complaint. Someone should tell your kid that they've made literally thousands of other movies since 1983. Well, almost without complaint, anyway. Chapter 25, And Suddenly I See You. It feels like the last warm day of autumn when they visit Becca's grave for the first time. Autumn in New York should be cold, dreary and pissing down rain, but it's not. It's bright and sunny and almost too warm for the jacket Bucky's wearing. It's a beautiful day. It doesn't make the occasion any easier, but he's still glad that the first time he sees his baby sister's tombstone, it's warm beneath the light of the sun. She had purchased a plot beside their parents. Bucky's throat closes up when he notices the very obvious, almost foreboding space left open for him. His own grave, he knows, is probably still standing at the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial, beside Steve's, bodiless as they were the day they were erected. He was never meant to be buried here, he realizes with no small amount of grief. He doesn't belong beside his parents and sister, their family plot. As morbid as it is, he's glad that Becca is here, with their mother and father, that at least in the very end she got to be with their family. He lays flowers on her grave, and runs his human hand over the letters of her name. You're probably the only person in the world who wouldn't be surprised that Steve followed me 70 years into the future, he tells her. I hope you found your happiness the way I found mine, Bebby. Steve lets out a quiet, fond chuckle. She always hated that nickname. How do you get Bebby out of Becca? Peter asks. The memory makes Bucky smile. He can see it, clearer every day, little toddler Becca waddling up to him, arms outstretched. How he would take her outside to play on days just like this one, show her off to the adoring pedestrians outside their Brooklyn estate, her bubbly, incoherent murmuring as she tried to tell them her own name. Beba, Bebu. He's not sure when Bebby followed after Beba, but it stuck with her right until the day Bucky left for war. She didn't take nearly as kindly to her nickname as he took to Bucky. I'm sorry I wasn't here for you, he thinks, palm flat over her name. I miss you, kiddo. He stands and drapes his metal arm over Peter's shoulders, holding the kid tight to him. I know you'd remember Steve, even if you wouldn't recognize him now that he's all tall and muscular, but he and I are us together finally. Took us long enough, hey? Steve's shoulder nudges against his. Bucky leans into him, receptive. And this, Becca, this is your nephew. His hand squeezes Peter's shoulder, firm and fond. My son, Peter. Hey, Aunt Becca, Peter says, his tone sad, but his smile soft and gentle. Dad told me a lot about you. Thanks for always trying to keep him out of trouble. He told me you always took really good care of him. God, why is that of all things, the thing that makes bitter tears sting his eyes? I know you're already at peace, but I want to tell you don't need to worry about him, Aunt Becca. Peter crouches down like Bucky just was, pressing his hand over the sun-warmed stone. Dad been through a lot, but I promise I'll take care of him. So wherever you are, you can rest easy, okay? He sounds so sincere, not a hint of disingenuousness in his voice, though he didn't even know Becca. I'm following in your footsteps. I'll take care of Dad and keep him safe, I promise. You already do, Bucky thinks, the thought popping into his head stubbornly, like it has a mind of its own. More than you could ever know. He lets Steve pull him in when a warm hand wraps around his waist, drawing him to the other man's side. It's only then that he's made aware of the tears dampening his cheeks. He knows it's not, but when Peter stands, sees the look on his face and immediately embraces him, and Bucky wraps his arms tight around the boy's shoulders and holds him to his chest. Well, for a moment, he swears it's Becca's arms that hug him back, fierce and unyielding, clinging to him desperately, the goodbye hug that they never got to have. Come on, Dad, Peter whines, tugging at his sleeve incessantly. Just one look, I won't even take it apart. Bucky scowls to trample down on the smile that's trying to stretch across his face. No, Peter. But it's so cool. There's nothing to be scared of, Tony says, snapping a pair of pliers at him ominously. We're professionals. Well, I am at least. We'll be gentle. Bucky throws the man a glare over the island counter. No to all three of you, it's not happening. Shiri would kill me. She doesn't have to know, Peter says, but he's smiling, so Bucky knows he's already accepted that he isn't winning this fight, and is arguing just to be a brat. It's absolutely Tony's influence. Just one peek, Tony says. He's pleading, but has a way of sounding like he's not. We'll be in and out before you know it. Cross my heart. Ned claps his hands together and peers up at him with wide, begging eyes. Please, Peter's dad. Bucky frowns at Ned and then points his spatula at Tony, accusing. Look what you did. Stop corrupting the children and go find something else to tinker with. My arm is off limits. As if on cue, Steve comes through the front door then, smiling at the four of them with his arms full of grocery bags. Steve, take the kids for a walk or something. I'm trying to make dinner here. Steve chuckles and joins him in the kitchen, setting the groceries down and ruffling Peter's hair fondly. Okay, guys, everybody out of the kitchen. You should know better than to hound somebody who's so well armed. Peter and Ned groan like they've been sucker punched. Tony looks wonderfully angry. Bucky just rolls his eyes, but fails at keeping the grin completely off his face when Steve laughs loudly at the collective outrage of the other three. I mean it, everyone out on the count on 3, or I'll grab the world's punniest dad jokes from the bookshelf. Tactical retreat, Tony announces, helping Steve to shepherd the boys out into the living room, like he wasn't the one who instigated the whole thing. Bucky mouths a silent thank you to Steve, who smiles and blows him a kiss. Dork, but it does put a dopey smile on his face as he turns back to the stove and finishes cooking. Friday nights at the Barnes Rogers household have become a lot more lively, especially since Tony came back into the fold. They seem to have a full house almost every week, which should feel like an overwhelming, drastic change for Bucky, but it's nice. It's really nice. It's nice seeing Peter happy. He's still the same cheerful, bubbly kid he's always been, but Bucky can tell he feels truly content on nights like this one, surrounded by his parents and his idol and his best friend, all coming together to spend an evening joking and laughing and eating, united by how much they love him. Sometimes Bucky wonders if he will ever face a problem that can't be solved by how much he, and everyone else, loves that boy. He seriously doubts it. Just as he's putting the final touches on their meal, Steve stomps back into the kitchen with a frustrated sigh and says, "Buck, tell Tony he's gone way too far this time." Tony's footsteps pad into the room behind Steve, so Bucky idly says without turning around, "Tony, you've probably gone way too far this time." The man huffs, indignant, "You don't even know what I did." "No, but knowing you, it was excessive and uncalled for." Silence hangs ominously. Bucky turns and raises one eyebrow at the two men, Tony looking reproachful, Steve frowning at him with his arms crossed over his broad chest. "Wow," Bucky says, "all right, seriously, what did you do?" Steve doesn't take his eyes off Tony. "He bought us a ranch." Bucky starts, his brain stuttering to a halt. "A what?" "For the last time, Rogers, I did not buy you a ranch," Tony snaps, narrowing his eyes up at Steve. "I bought you the horses. The ranch is just to house them." That's the same thing," Steve says, his voice rising 2 whole octaves. "Wow, it doesn't matter if you don't put our names on the deed, Tony. You bought an entire ranch to house 3 very expensive animals which were already way too big of a gift. Stop carelessly spending your money on these things or I swear, I'm going to go bald from the stress." "Steve, there's no way to say this without sounding like a dick, but I've literally made back twice the amount of money I spent on this just within the 4 minutes we've spent talking about it. I'm a billionaire. It'll take a lot more than an extravagant gift now and then to bankrupt me." Bucky's head spins. He feels like he'll only get more lost if he doesn't intervene, so he lifts a hand and says, Can we rewind here for a second, please?" Both men turn to look at him. Steve looks expectant, but Tony looks ready to keep arguing. Bucky's brain is still trying to catch up. "Tony, why did you randomly buy us horses?" The man looks at him like he just asked how many days are in a week, seemingly stunned by the stupidity. "You guys went riding before, remember, back in Montana?" "Well, yes," Bucky says, "but that's no reason to go out and buy us our own horses. We were planning to find a stable that offers trail riding once we were completely settled in. You didn't need to do this." "Well, now you don't need to find a stable," Tony says like it's obvious. "Peter mentioned a couple weeks back that he wanted to go again, so I thought I'd surprise him." He turns to Steve and almost pouts. "I figured you might complain if I left them tied up to your railing outside, so the ranch was kind of necessary. I won't apologize." Steve rubs his forehead, visibly frustrated. "Tony, no, we're grateful, it's just, that's a huge gift to arbitrarily throw into a conversation like that. I'm still processing." "Well, Cap, the horses aren't going anywhere, so I kind of think you can take all the time you need." "Really though, Tony," Bucky says, his voice dropping low to a near whisper so the boys can't hear from the living room. "You're already helping me out so much with you-know-what. That in itself is a huge gift. We don't want you to feel obligated to spend your money on us. We're doing all right." "And you shouldn't buy Peter everything he says he wants," Steve adds. "Not to say that I think he'd become spoiled or greedy, it's just, it's not a good habit to get into. If you absolutely have to buy people things, save it for birthdays and holidays, okay? It'd just be better for all involved." Okay, fine." Tony throws his hands up in surrender, conceding. "I yield, you guys win. No more big gifts after the horses and you know what." Bucky and Steve sigh in unison. "Thank you, Tony," Bucky says. The smile Tony gives him might just be the fondest, most genuine one Bucky ever seen on his face. "Don't mention it, bucko." Bucky and Steve let Tony break the news to Peter that he bought them their own horses, who shares his father's, reactions of being completely shocked and more than a little overwhelmed. Then Tony offhandedly mentions that they're the very same horses the trio rode during their little adventure back in Montana, and Peter switches from dumbstruck to downright thrilled in the fraction of a nanosecond. "You bought Andromeda?" he asks hopefully, practically vibrating with excitement. Tony looks put out, but Bucky knows it's a farce, and Brittany spurs, and the other one, whatever the hell his name was, David Hasselhoff. Peter's nose scrunches up at the pun. "I don't think that was it." "Well, regardless," Tony shrugs, "the 3 you guys rode are the 3 that I bought." "You should get one too, Mr. Stark," Peter says, eyes bright at the idea. "Then we could all go riding together." Tony looks like he would rather walk through dog shit. "No thanks, kiddo. Lumbering around on farm animals can be your idea of a good time. I'll be inside sipping scotch by the fire." "Just be grateful he's coming with us, Pete," Bucky says, ruffling the boy's hair. Apparently it's a miracle he's willing to go on vacation somewhere that isn't tropical and sunny in the first place. "You're damn right it is," Tony scoffs. "You're lucky it's volcano season in Hawaii, or I'd be in the middle of the Pacific Ocean right now." Peter laughs joyously and shakes his head. I'm pretty sure that's not how it works, but okay." Bucky smiles as the two banter back and forth, relaxing fully into Steve's side, cuddled up on the couch. It's been a bit hectic planning for their trip to New Jersey to stay at Tony's new ranch, mostly because of all the other little things that are going into making it a special occasion, but the day is steadily approaching, and Bucky already knows it will all be worth it. Steve presses a lingering kiss against his temple, gesturing to the pamphlet he's been focused on for several minutes now. Liberty Science Center has a planetarium and an interactive exhibit we could stop by on the way. Both Tony and Peter's heads snap up at the suggestion. "Yeah," Peter grins, eyes twinkling. "Can we? We totally should." Tony's voice is dry but undeniably teasing as he says, "Pretty sure they'll insist on waiting until it's posthumous before they let us donate you to their exhibit, Cap." Steve doesn't look away from his reading as he gently tosses a throw pillow at the man's head. Bucky chuckles but doesn't tear his eyes away from the pamphlet's photos of the planetarium. It looks a lot like the one he took Peter to on his 15th birthday. He supposes that makes sense. They're all the same stars, after all. So for a moment he isn't sure the boy will enjoy it as much as he enjoyed it the first time. But when he looks up, Peter is peering at him with wide, eager, pleading eyes, so Bucky grins and says to Steve, "I think the planetarium is a great idea." The beaming smile his son gives him seals the deal. "Christ Barnes, would you please relax? I'm telling you, everything is going to be fine." Tony sounds confident as he always does, but that doesn't do Bucky's nerves any good. He can't stop the tremor in his leg no matter how hard he tries. He's nervous, scared shitless really, if he's being completely honest. "I can't help it," he says, leg bouncing anxiously. "This is it, Tony." Tony sighs and rubs both hands over his face. "Bucky, I've greased the wheels on this thing so thoroughly that it would take divine intervention to put the brakes on it now. It's happening. We only have to wait like 10 more minutes. It's going to be fine." Forcing himself to take a deep breath, Bucky nods, elbows braced atop his knees and hands clasped together. He knows Tony is right. Almost every person in Bucky's life jumped at the chance to make this thing happen, and they're some of the most renowned, respected, and trustworthy people in the entire world. So regardless of Bucky's exonerated status and general infamy, there really is, on paper, no reason for his application to be denied. Tony's money helped too, somewhere along the line, he's sure. He doesn't doubt for a moment that Tony paid off anyone who felt they needed to voice their concerns, but even still, doubt and anxiety fester in him. "God, Tony, being in court didn't terrify me as much as this does." He winces the moment the words leave his mouth, wishing he could instantly take them back. Tony's face doesn't change, but his shoulders are a little tighter, his hands clenched a little more firmly around his biceps. He doesn't like to be reminded of that day, Bucky knows. He feels like a dick. "I'm sorry." "It's fine," the man waves him off. "I'm sure this particular sort of prenatal panic is tough to contend with. Just keep your head on. They're not going to deny it, but if they do, we can appeal. You have billionaires, living legends, literal kings, and scary-looking automotive dealership owners vouching for you. They're gravely outmatched." He can't help but smile. "If I spent the rest of my life trying, I could never tell you how grateful I am for all that you've done for me." "Don't sweat it." "I want to," Bucky insists. "No, don't roll your eyes at me, damn it, Tony, I want to sweat it. I want you to know how grateful I am to have met you and for everything you've done. None of this would have been remotely possible without you, and on top of everything, you're here with me now despite how much I made you suffer, and I need you to know what it means. To me, and to Steve, and most of all to Peter. So just thank you." "Yeah, okay, you're welcome," Tony says, adding stress to each word, clearly deeply uncomfortable. Look, I'm not saying you and I and Steve never need to have this conversation, I'm just, first of all, cards on the table. I'm not there yet, I'm working on it. I'm just fucking sick of being angry all the time, okay? It's exhausting. Sure enough, when he moves his hand from his eyes, they suddenly look darker, the skin underneath them almost bruised, like just this conversation has completely taken the wind out of Tony's sails. I don't want to resent you and Steve, that's it. Does that mean I'm going to force myself to forgive and forget? No, but every minute I spend keeping my distance from the two of you out of anger is another minute I spend away from that kid who is family to me now, whether you like it or not. We can do the whole groveling thanks and apologies routine later, Bucky, when I can handle it. This cramped, musty office is not the place for it, and it sure as hell isn't the time either. Okay, Bucky says, smiling when Tony seems to sag in relief. It's your call, Tony. Am I at least allowed to thank you for bringing me to said cramped, musty office? There's no meanness in it, but Bucky knows Tony isn't holding any of his punches when he stares off into the middle distances and says, I didn't do it for you. Bucky doesn't know how to pack it. It's not that it's big or bulky or oddly shaped, because it's none of those things, it's just weirdly heavy. Not literally, the thing weighs absolutely nothing, but when he tries to pack it alongside his clothes and toiletries, suddenly his bag feels like it holds an atomic bomb, the sheer fragility of its contents turning the entire package into a delicate, breakable thing. He doesn't wrap it because he knows they have several stops to make before they get to the ranch, and he figures he can get Steve or Tony to distract Peter long enough for him to sneak away and secretly buy some wrapping paper. Maybe even a frame. At least he would feel better dragging it around if he knew it was shielded behind a pane of glass. The way it is now, tucked away in nothing but an envelope, makes Bucky anxious to let his bag out of his sight. Are you all right, Buck? Bucky turns to look at Steve, standing in the doorway of their bedroom, watching him. He supposes he does look a little frazzled, frozen in the middle of their room, hands anxiously tight around the straps of his backpack, staring off into space with a worried expression. Even if he weren't being so obvious, he's sure Steve would be able to tell how tense he is just by looking at him. He doesn't bother trying to lie about it. I'm scared shitless, Stevie. Steve's open, heartfelt expression eases some of the anxiety swirling in his gut. The man approaches him slowly, hand outstretched to gently stroke down Bucky's right arm. It's okay, he says, his voice deep and warm and soothing. Come here. He wraps his arms around Bucky, holding him. It's a firm embrace, but it's exactly what Bucky needs right now, warm and solid and as dependable as the ground beneath his feet. He sighs and tucks his face against Steve's throat, takes a deep breath of that familiar, comforting scent. I know he'll be happy, Bucky murmurs against Steve's skin, but I'm still worried that he won't. Steve kisses his hair, nods to show he's listening. Doubt claws at Bucky's insides. Do you think he's changed his mind? That makes Steve huff out a breathless laugh. Not a chance in hell, Buck. What about you? The arms holding him loosen just a hair. He can hear the confusion in the man's voice when he asks, what about me? Bucky lifts his head from the crook of the man's neck and gazes into his eyes. Have you changed your mind? About our family, Steve asks, tone dripping with so much disbelief that it brings a smile to Bucky's face. Yeah, that's fair. That's what he gets for letting his anxiety ask stupid questions. Bucky, I love you and our son more than anything else in the whole world. I haven't changed my mind about a single thing. He feels a bit like a lovesick teenager when his heart thunders in his chest. For as long as he can remember, that's the first time Steve's ever told him he loves him. I love you too, he says and grins, sort of wanting to cry but blushing too hard and smiling too wide to let the tears come. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I'm really glad you found us, Steve. You've always made everything you touch better, and we were no exception. He runs his hands over Steve's shoulders, drawing the man closer to him. I'm sorry for not saying it sooner, but thank you for breaking into my apartment. Steve laughs, giving his head a shake before pulling Bucky into a tender, chaste kiss. He cups Bucky's face with both hands and barely pulls away as he says, voice low and gentle, I'm glad I found you too, Buck. I knew I would. I wasn't going to stop until I did. Their noses softly brush together as Steve keeps his face a hair's breadth away from his own. But I had no idea we'd someday have this. A home, a family, that I could finally call you mine. His thumbs rub gentle circles over his cheekbones, reverent. I didn't even dare to let myself dream it, Bucky. And now I get to sleep holding you in my arms every night, 2 rooms away from our perfect son. Some days I wake up thinking it all has to be a cruel joke, that any minute I'll get sucked back into reality, because it can't possibly be real that I get to have this life. I know what you mean, Bucky says, because he does. I've had that exact same thought more times than I can count since the day Peter and I met. This kind of happiness, the warmth and intensity of it. He swallows, lowering his gaze from Steve's searching, impossibly blue eyes. It feels like more than I could ever deserve, so how can it possibly be real? Steve cups his cheeks and solemnly says, I think we might have some self-worth issues, pal. It shocks a laugh out of Bucky that breaks the budding tension of the moment. He shakes his head and leans into Steve a little harder, chuckling. My therapist tells me the same thing. Maybe we can work on that together, what do you say? Bucky hums deep in his throat, his eyes slipping closed. Together? Yeah, together works for him. Once Steve's put the thought into his head, Peter is completely sold on the idea of stopping by the planetarium on their way to the ranch. Bucky can't help but tease him for being more excited about the museum than he is about getting to ride his very own horse for an entire weekend getaway, but Peter just laughs and swears that he is very excited about the horseback riding too. Dad, cross my heart. Tony hadn't wanted to carpool with them, so Peter had offered to keep him company during the drive down. Bucky doesn't even feel the urge to sulk over Peter choosing not to ride with them. The quiet drive with Steve is nice, and the weight of his overnight bag's contents still looms heavily all around him, so he's actually somewhat grateful for the extra space right now. He knows he's going to be an anxious mess until all is said and done. And more than anything, he doesn't want Peter to suspect a thing. Tony's car is already parked and vacant when they pull up to the museum. Bucky hesitates for way too long as Steve exits their car, his mind racing, the anxiety swelling in his gut. He should leave it. It will be fine here, it's not an actual bomb, and nothing is going to happen to it while they're in there, he knows that. But somehow, the thought of leaving it in the back seat, unattended, for hours on end makes him feel sick. It means too much to him. So he grabs his backpack before following Steve out of the car, slinging it onto his back, and hopping it doesn't make him stand out more than being seen with Iron Man, and Captain America already does. Peter doesn't question it when he sees him, and that's really all that matters to Bucky. He's already riveted to some groundbreaking feat of technological innovation, rambling back and forth with an equally eager, though much better at hiding it, Tony. It takes the four of them a while to make it through the interactive exhibit, and even longer to follow every one of Peter's wide-eyed whims before they finally reach the planetarium. As hard as he tries, Bucky just can't concentrate on the exhibits, bright and colorful and interesting as they are. All he can concentrate on is the impossible weight on his back and the carefree smile on Peter's face. I have to tell him, he thinks to himself, sick with nerves. It gets worse every time he looks in Peter's direction, sees that wide, joyful smile on his adorable little face. He can't lose his composure now, not when he and Steve worked so hard on the plan, spent hours and hours whispering conspiratorially on how to break the news. The plan, he needs to stick to the plan. They're going to the ranch, the four of them, even Tony's in on the big idea. Bucky's worked too hard and planned things too carefully to screw it all up now, just because he's anxious for reasons that don't even make sense to him. But God, it's hard to even look at Peter knowing he doesn't know. Steve, face buried in a pamphlet about the documentary they're playing in the planetarium's theater, follows blindly behind Tony and Peter as they go through the double doors and into the dark, densely seated room, too absorbed to notice the way Bucky is lagging behind with every step. He only makes it to the doors before he stops. I have to tell him. Fuck, he's a mess. He needs a moment, he realizes, his heart racing. Just a moment to himself, to calm the coiling anxiety in his gut and get his shit together. He slips away while the other three relax into their seats, back through the theater doors and down the painted travel path, until he enters a large, dark dome. It's startling enough that, for a moment, nothing else exists. The room has to be almost 100 feet across. He had thought the planetarium he took Peter to on his 15th birthday had been huge, and technologically impressive, but this one, it's massive. And every inch of the curved walls and ceiling are dotted with literally trillions of stars, brighter and more vibrant than any sky Bucky has ever seen, even back in Montana, in the middle of absolutely nowhere. He can see every galaxy, every constellation, even the ones he can't name. It's overwhelming in its beauty and shocking in its sheer size. Bucky has never felt smaller or more inconsequential than he does standing beneath all those stars. At least he did until a tiny hand gently cups his own, and a soft, worried voice breaks him from his thoughts. Dad. Bucky whirls around, eyes wide, widening even more when they land on Peter's concerned face. Are you okay? He asks, quiet enough that no one else around them can hear. I thought maybe you just went to the bathroom or something, but you didn't come back. Peter's eyes search his own, no doubt spotting every speck of worry Bucky feels. What's wrong? It's not a lie when Bucky takes a deep breath and says, Nothing's wrong, Pete. The boy clearly doesn't believe him. His dark gaze flickers over Bucky's face, like if he stares long enough, he'll be able to see every little thing that Bucky is trying to hide. The concern in his voice absolutely breaks Bucky's heart. "Then why do you look so sad?" He can't help but laugh, the ridiculousness of the whole thing catching up to him. Sad. Peter thinks he's sad on today of all days when it couldn't be further from the actual truth. "I wanted things to be perfect," he confesses with a sigh, a resigned smile crossing his face. Peter stares at him in confusion, clearly totally lost. "I'm sorry. The truth is, I've been wanting to turn this weekend into a make-up birthday party for you, since I wasn't here to celebrate you turning 16. "Dad," Peter says gently, "you and Pops weren't exactly subtle. I mean, you guys packed 2 full birthday cakes into the cooler before we left. I sort of figured out this was a birthday thing like 3 weeks ago." "Yeah, okay," Bucky says, grinning in spite of himself. "Maybe we weren't exactly slick with the whole birthday angle, but I still wanted it to be a surprise. We had it all figured out, even Tony was in on it. Everything was set up to go according to the plan, but I can't do it like this, Peter." Peter looks at him like he's speaking in tongues. "Can't do what like what?" "I can't keep carrying this around knowing you don't know about it," he says, gesturing to his backpack, which he slides off his shoulder and delicately lowers to the floor. "I wanted it to be a surprise, something I could gift you with seemingly out of nowhere, but after everything we've been through and everything it took to get to this point, I can't do it, Pete. I'm sorry for ruining the surprise element of this, but I can't go one more minute with you not knowing." "Not knowing what?" Peter asks, confusion and fear clear as day on his face. Bucky inhales slowly, the deep breath before the plunge, and unzips his backpack to retrieve the innocuous, immeasurably valuable envelope from inside. He hands it to Peter wordlessly, watches with rapt attention and endless fondness as the boy timidly pulls it open, hand reaching inside to grasp the single piece of laminated paper it holds. Peter's eyes dance quickly over the page, widening when the meaning of it finally sinks in. A smile spreads across Bucky's face as he gently takes the boy's hand and says, answering him a moment later, that "you're mine." The boy's gaze flickers between Bucky's face and the adoption certificate in his hand, speechless. He doesn't look upset, not really, but the anxiety is still coursing violently through Bucky, and he can't help but ask, "Are you mad that I just went ahead and did it, that I didn't ask you first?" "Mad," Peter repeats softly, like the word is alien to him. He doesn't take his eyes off the certificate, like he's scared the words will change if he looks away. Is this real? It's like it's an actual, It's real," Bucky says, smiling softly. "Tony helped me expedite the process. It took some legwork since he was technically already your caregiver, but we got it all straightened out. It's real, Peter." He gently grabs the boy's shoulders, squeezing reassuringly. "From now on, it won't just be a cover when I call you my son. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, I'm your dad." He already was, he has been for the majority of the time they've been together, and they both know it. But it's different seeing it on paper, holding the proof right in front of them. It's different knowing that, officially, Bucky and Peter are father and son, and nothing can ever change that now. Tears fill the boy's eyes, but he still doesn't look away from the piece of paper in his hands. "You're my dad." "Yeah, kiddo," Bucky says, "I'm your dad." Peter looks up at him, the tears falling down his cheeks, and throws himself into Bucky's arms. Bucky embraces him firmly, pulls the boy flush against him and wraps him in his arms. His boy. Finally, when he says that, when he thinks it, it's no longer sort of a lie. He never has to feel guilty about calling Peter that ever again. After nearly 2 years of dreaming about it, he can finally be the father he's wanted to be to this child, that identity seen and validated by the world, even if it's only on paper. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," Bucky says, arms tight around the boy's back, hand gently cupping the back of Peter's head. "After the application was approved, it was so hard to remember what the hell I was waiting for. I just wanted to tell you. I wanted you to know that now there's not a chance of anyone ever trying to separate us." He presses the side of his face against Peter's hair, hugs him tighter when the boy sobs. "You're mine, you're my kid, Peter." "Thank you," Peter says, clutching onto him for all he's worth. Thank you, Dad, for wanting me, for staying with me like you said you would, for keeping your promise." He buries his face in Bucky's shoulder, muffling his soft little voice against his jacket. "Thank you for being my dad." Bucky lets his own tears fall as he holds his son tighter. "It's the best thing that ever happened to me, kiddo. You don't need to be scared anymore, okay? You're home." He pulls away slightly, gently presses their foreheads together. "You're home." Peter takes a shaky, watery breath, but nods in agreement, wiping his wet face on his sleeves as they pull away from each other. He hasn't let go of his adoption certificate, and Bucky has a feeling the boy will refuse if he offers to take it, so Bucky doesn't say anything, just quietly waits for his son, God, his son, to compose himself beneath the worried, watchful gazes of the other tourists milling about around them. Two of those tourists, Bucky realizes when he looks up, he recognizes. Steve is smiling at them from across the dome, hands in his pockets and expression fond. He looks soft, watching them, like he's observing something so irreplaceable and precious, he can't bear to interrupt it. Tony looks a little more uncomfortable next to him, but his eyes fill with concern and affection when he spots what Peter is holding, and the way he kind of looks like he wants to grin and cry at the same time warms Bucky's heart. When Peter notices the two of them standing there, he gives an embarrassed little laugh and scrubs his face a bit harder with the back of his sleeve. Steve and Tony seem to take that as permission to join in, and they walk over to them, to where Bucky and Peter are standing beneath the Milky Way, at the edge of this giant black dome that somehow contains the entire universe. I was a billion little pieces. Till you pulled me into focus. Astronomy in reverse. It was me who was discovered. Venus sleeping at last.